I would like to thank all of you for attending today. I'm Benita Croft, as you probably know, Chair of the Commission. I'll be chairing this meeting and walking everybody through what is again a Zoom meeting for this month. I'll start as usual by asking all of you to please mute your line when you aren't speaking. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that this call is taking place on the traditional territory of the Niitsitapi, made up of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Iarhe Nakota First Nations comprised of the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. These are the people who made treaty with the Crown, forming Treaty 7 territory. The city of Calgary is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I know that I speak for all of us on the Police Commission when I say that we condemn anti-Black racism and prejudice in all forms. We stand in solidarity with our Black, Indigenous, and people of color colleagues, families, and citizens. At our last public commission meeting back in June, we were all reeling from the news reports at that time about the discovery of hundreds of children buried at residential school sites across Canada. Later this week, on September 30th, we will be marking the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This day honors the lost children and survivors of residential schools, their families, and communities. This will be a day for public commemoration of the tragic and painful history and ongoing impacts of residential schools. But it will also be a day for private reflection. For many of us, reflection on our own journeys of learning about this history and on how we can engage in the reconciliation process. And for all of us here, on how we can continue to further reconciliation within policing. Now, before we get to the substance of the meeting, I will, as usual, explain the format that we'll be following. I'm sure that many of us were looking forward to moving past COVID restrictions and in particular returning to having these meetings in person. But for now, unfortunately, we have to continue with virtual meetings using this Zoom webinar. As with our previous Zoom meetings, the public session of the meeting is being recorded so that we can make it available to those who are unable to attend. I also understand that one of our media guests may be recording the meeting for their own use. Among the panelists in this webinar, we have members of the Commission, as well as staff and executives and others from CPS. We will also have some special guests from Illumina Research Partners who will join us to give us an overview of our 2021 citizen consultation results. Joining us as attendees in viewing mode, we have some citizen guests as well as media. We'll hear presentations from CPS on the topics listed on our agenda. Commission members will then be invited to ask questions. Please use the raise hand feature in Zoom for that purpose. You'll notice that the webinar has a Q&A feature. I would like to point out that this feature is enabled solely to allow public guests to contact the administrator if you have any technical issues. We are not able to accommodate a live chat during the meeting. As usual, though, citizens who wish to speak to the Commission have an opportunity to register, or did have an opportunity in advance, if you want to make comments at the end of our agenda when we have the public participation portion. At that time, individuals who've registered will be invited to unmute your line and make your comments. As a reminder to those who do wish to speak, because our agenda is very full, we are only able to provide a limited amount of time for this portion of our agenda. We're continuing to look at new options to allow citizens to provide their views to Commission in other formats. Before the media Q&A, we will end the public portion of this meeting. Public participants, as well as commissioners and CPS, will be asked to sign off at that time. The Chief and I and our Illumina partners, we hope, will be able to remain behind to answer some media questions. This will give commissioners and CPS a short break before signing back on for the in-camera portion of the meeting. I will now call for declarations of pecuniary interest or conflict of interest. Hearing none, I will now ask for approval of the consent agenda. Do I have any objections to the consent agenda? Hearing no objections, I'll declare the consent agenda approved as presented. The next agenda item is the Chair's report. I would like once again to welcome back all of our commissioners who are in attendance. Normally we would welcome everyone back after the summer break, but this year I don't know that anybody feels there was much of a break. Even though we weren't holding our regular commission meetings over the summer, there was a tremendous amount of work being done by all of our members over the past several months. And I thank each and every one of you, as well as commission staff and CPS, for your hard work throughout that time. As we noted back in our June meeting, 3 of our commission members have stepped back from their commission positions due to election matters. Councillor Kara and Commissioner North Pagan are both in active campaign mode as we head towards the City Council election in October. And Councillor Shahal, as I'm sure you all know, was elected to Parliament in last week's federal election, and so will be leaving his position as City Councillor. We congratulate Councillor Shahal and wish him the best in his new position. There is one other person absent from the meeting today whom I would like to acknowledge. Lori DeLuca, who has served for quite some time as Communications and Policy Director with the Commission, has moved on to take another opportunity. Lori is a very gifted communications professional and has been a tremendous resource to all of us on Commission. Certainly during my service with Commission, we've all relied very heavily on her. And I know I speak for all of us when I say that she will be greatly missed. Indeed, as we prepared for this meeting, she's already been greatly missed. We can now turn to agenda item number 5, which is the Chief's report. This report will include several CPS presentations, which you'll see listed on the agenda, and we'll turn to those in a few moments. But before we do that, Chief, I'd like to turn briefly to the item that's coming up later on our agenda, which is the report from Illumina on the Commission's 2021 citizen consultations. This report is hot off the presses, and those of us here at Commission haven't yet had much time to review it in detail. I know the same is true for you and the rest of CPS. I expect that you are all as keen as we are to hear Illumina's presentation later this afternoon. We're looking forward to learning more about the results of these consultations and using those learnings in our anti-racism work going forward. Although we know that it's too soon for you to have absorbed and considered that report, do you have any early observations that you'd like to share?
Thanks, Chair Croft. I appreciate that. As you say, we're still looking through the report and digesting the content as well, and obviously looking forward to the discussions and presentation from Illumina later in this meeting. I guess I would say early on that I think it's really important that the Commission and the service undertook this level of consultation. I think it makes a lot of sense knowing that last year the quantitative survey definitely demonstrated that certainly the Black and Indigenous communities displayed the lowest levels of trust in relation to all of the segments of the community here in Calgary. So I think it's quite right that we actually delve in a more deeper fashion to kind of get to some of the key insights. And I think, while difficult to hear, I think many of the key insights that we see and that we will hear about in this particular research, I think are fairly consistent with what we heard at City Hall during the presentations there regarding systemic racism. And then since then, when we have worked with communities since that time. So I think in some ways, the findings, very important work reinforces that the work we're doing with the community right now is the right work. It's focused in certainly the right areas, but obviously there's more to be done. And we're committed to doing that. We appreciate the opportunity, obviously, to have been involved in the research. And I think there's no downside to continuing to engage with community and to continue to, I think, try to obtain the deepest insights we can. So I think this was a really good piece of work. My understanding was the methodology very culturally appropriate. So I'm, like I say, looking forward to the conversation going forward. Thanks for the opportunity to comment on it.
Mute again. Thanks very much for those comments, Chief. And once again, we look forward to working with you and everybody at CPS on implementing recommendations that come out of the consultations and related consultations we've already had. We can now move on to the presentations that you and your people in the room there at CPS have prepared for us. The first presentation by CPS will be on mandatory vaccinations. This is an opportunity for us to hear an update on pandemic matters, or no, after that, we'll have an update on pandemic matters and the impacts on CPS operations. The next report after that will be on the CPS Anti-Racism Action Plan. And finally, we'll hear an update on recent crime trends, which is our opportunity to hear about the noteworthy activities that are affecting our community and about how CPS is responding to those of late. This is, as you can tell, a full agenda of presentations, and I expect we'll have more desire for questions and discussion than time might allow. In an effort to manage that time efficiently, I'm going to try something a little different, which is to ask CPS to complete all of the presentations before we turn to questions from commissioners. Commissioners will then have an opportunity to ask questions on all of the presentations simultaneously, which might keep you on your toes there in the room, and we will see how this experiment goes. Chief, I will turn it over to you so you can introduce the various presenters.
Okay, thank you. We'll work through items 5.1 to 5.4 and managing the time along the way here. I'll start out with just a bit of a verbal update on the vaccine issue, and then pass it on. Obviously, that'll be a good segue into the pandemic update, which will be Deputy Tofik and Superintendent Asif Rashid. So just on this topic of vaccinations, we continue to work with the City of Calgary and our unions and associations to develop a COVID-19 vaccination policy that makes the most sense for our service. As a signatory on our collective agreements here at the service, the City of Calgary is an important partner. And as you can imagine, as a large public sector employer, there's a number of important considerations that have been raised by employees and unions, the city themselves in terms of their operations, and of course, context-specific considerations for our service. As you'll hear, we're fortunate to have very low numbers of COVID cases during this punishing fourth wave. Those details will come to you shortly. But a recent survey on vaccination rates, I think you were aware that we did a survey involving CPS employees, both sworn and civilian. That survey yielded a response rate of approximately 82%. And so we believe that our vaccination rates, and that would be a combination of those who were confirmed to be vaccinated with 2 shots and 14 days, coupled with the number of people who had 1 shot, but who indicated that they were planning on being fully vaccinated. Based on the combination of those two, we believe that our vaccination rates are around 85% at the point that the survey closed. Now, the point that the survey closed is an important consideration here, because the survey closed prior to the significant public policy decisions that had been made both by the province and by the city in terms of the municipal vaccine passport bylaw. So anecdotally, although we're unable to quantify any changes since then, I think we saw in the general population an increase in vaccination uptake because of the very practical impacts on people's lives in many areas. So it could well be higher than that. What we're seeing in other municipalities around policy is that there's really 2 scenarios around the country. The first is, for reasons that I mentioned, with the municipalities being signatories on the collective agreements, that police service vaccination policies would align with those of the municipality. So that would be the case in cities like Toronto. Then a second option is the police service vaccination policies not aligning directly with municipalities due to police-specific operational realities. So I can tell you that we've explored both of these scenarios quite deeply. We're not in a position at this time to make our final decision public. I think I could say it best this way. We're in the process of doing some final detail work in relation to the options, and then we expect to coordinate an announcement with the city, and that would come in the coming days. What I can say at this point, I think, though, with full confidence, is that the majority of our members of our service are fully vaccinated. And I think that's important for Calgarians to be confident that any policy that we do put in place with respect to this will certainly ensure that they're safe when dealing with members of the Calgary Police Service. And I think equally, employees of the service can also be confident that they too will be safe in the workplace when dealing with their coworkers. So I think subject to any questions you may have at the end, I'll leave that part there, and then I'll pass it over to Deputy Tofik initially for the pandemic impacts update.
All right. Thanks, Chief, and thanks, Chair. Just to give you an overview of the impacts to the CPS around COVID and the pandemic. The last time we spoke with you in June, we were dealing with a very much different scenario moving into the summer with the ceasing of the public health orders and the dropping of the bylaw in relation to COVID numbers. As a result of that, we did scale back our incident management team, our IMT, over the summertime to to a certain degree, just due to there wasn't the same necessity to deal with the same types of enforcement action and stuff that come with that. But of course, that has all changed with the change in legislation and such over the recent month here. So with that being said, we did reconstitute the IMT, and I'll have Asif kind of break that down for the commission's benefit here in a minute. As well, in the background, we've been monitoring the public reaction to all of that. Of course, with involvement with the public health orders, number 42 and 43 that the province instituted recently, which includes the restrictions exemption program, and then the subsequent council bylaw, the vaccine passport bylaw, and the subsequent enforcement clauses around that. We've been working with our internal membership just to ensure that we have the proper information to do any enforcement action that's required there. Of course, in the midst, we've had an election, and there was great attention put to working with the Elections Canada to make sure that that went as peacefully as possible. And to that extent, we did have a number of incidents at polling stations. I believe there was 12 in total, with one resulting in some criminal charges as a result of an altercation there, where a subject assaulted one of the workers at the location. To the extent that we're working with partners at the province, as you recall, we did have a working group going provincially, the enforcement framework for repeat offenders, operational and strategic groups working. That's been reinvigorated over the last few weeks, and we've continued to meet. That includes representation from Alberta Health Services, Alberta Labor, Alberta Prosecution Services, various law enforcement agencies, and Alberta Gaming, Liquor and Cannabis. So we are meeting on a weekly basis at this point to talk about a variety of topics, inclusive of enforcement action, the legislation, the changes, and even just working through the public health orders and what that means in day-to-day policing operations. So that's kind of an overview of where we're at with that. I'll maybe turn it over to Asif just to talk about our incident management team and how we're structured and how that will work with things. And I should just say that internally, our numbers have been quite stable over the summer. We right now are currently sitting at 2 active cases in isolation. We have 2 symptomatic individuals awaiting their testing results total in our whole organization. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've had 191 cases total. So I'll turn it to Asif maybe just to give you an overview of the IMT as it sits right now.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Topic, Chair Croft. So as Deputy Topic alluded to, the incident management team, or the IMT, was reconvened on September the 16th. That was strategically conceived to align with the public health orders that were being announced by the province on the 16th and later on the 20th of September. As you'll recall from our previous exercise with the IMT, we replicate the model that's endorsed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, similarly the Calgary Emergency Management Agency. And the reason for that is to align our functions and our processes to create some efficacy between local and national initiatives to contain COVID. Our incident priorities on the IMT are essentially to ensure the safety and wellness of CPS employees and the community that we serve. Also to maintain essential policing into our community, business continuity that is, during the pandemic. And of course, we also need to take a position in supporting the province and our health partners in containing the pandemic. The objectives that the IMT has set out to do and how we do that is by maintaining the health, safety, and wellness of CPS members during the pandemic. We've conceived a number of bespoke plans and procedures in relation to personal protective equipment, occupational health care, psychological wellness, and resiliency for our members so they can continue to serve during these remarkable times. We've also worked with our facilities section to develop stringent fleet plans, facilities plans, including cleaning, security, management, and supply issues as it pertains to PPE and logistics support for our membership. As far as policing operations as business continuity is concerned, we've implemented processes and procedures that align with public health orders to ensure that staffing, resourcing, and human resource management strategies are employed, and that we're able to deliver the best service to Calgarians that is expected of us as your police service. We've also supported non-essential policing services and operations during the pandemic, working with our partners, as I said, with Calgary Emergency Management Agency, some of the other partners at the city to help contain the pandemic. And finally, the maintenance of internal and external communications during the pandemic has been pivotal. particularly it comes to the interpretation of the bylaw and of the public health measures to ensure that our members are adequately informed and able to deliver services to Calgarians that we've come to enjoy. Those are my updates for the incident management team. Deputy Topic, I don't know if you wanted me to cover anything else. Or...
No, I think you've covered the majority. I think if there's any questions, we can handle those when.
Thanks, sir.
And with that, we'll move directly to item 5.3, the anti-racism action plan update, and that'll be Deputy Chief McClellan.
Thanks, Chief. Good afternoon, Chair, and everyone else. Thanks very much for the opportunity to provide these updates. It's been a couple of months. I'm actually quite excited to share with you what has come out of our engagement, both internally and externally, what we have learned, and some of the projects that we have been working on. As you all know, in September of 2020, we made a commitment to be relentless in the pursuit of anti-racism, equity, and inclusion. We knew the work we committed to undertake would require significant reflection, time, and patience. We've been talking about anti-racism as a root cause that prevents us from achieving equity, diversion, and inclusion. We know that we must first become anti-racist to then become a truly equitable, diverse, inclusive organization. We have been learning how to apply an anti-racism lens in all that we do through participatory problem solving with our communities and members. Through our continued engagement, we have identified 12 potential areas that have systemic racism. I can share one identified area, which is the chaplaincy program review. The review of this program was initiated at the request of our Gender and Sexual Diversity Advisory Board and brought before the internal ARAC, who thoroughly discussed the relationship between religion and systemic racism in a policing organization. We are continuing to discuss this and will have conversations on possible recommendations. We are in the process of creating an action plan with our boards, which will assist in the creation of our long-term strategy towards transformational change. So far, 3 themes have been identified: training and education, our sworn and civilian recruitment process, and the complaints and compliments process. We are currently working with external partners to enhance our external website so that we can have all of this information accessible. In addition, we have also created a robust tactical communication strategy that will also be shared in the very near future. As well, we recently contracted Dr. Patrina Duhaney of the University of Calgary to conduct an anti-racism, EDI, and environmental scan of over 100 police services in 5 countries, including Canada, the United States, New Zealand, the United Kingdom, and Australia. We learned that the CPS is one of 4 police agencies in these 5 countries actively using anti-racism language and working towards a corporate anti-racism strategy. We have also compiled a list of 173 anti-racism recommendations from municipal, provincial, federal, and international bodies, which we are reviewing to see what can be incorporated into the Calgary Police Service. We have some tangible police performance measures that we know that has changed our members' knowledge. We currently have preliminary performance measures drafted, which will initiate engagement and consultation with our internal and external stakeholders. And we're also working with our city and partners to ensure that we have alignment. Briefly on our external anti-racism and action committee, there have been 6 external ARAC meetings since it was established in March 2021. As I have alluded to, there have been uncomfortable but professional conversations. We understand this is necessary in order for real, meaningful change to happen. At all meetings, we have had guests come and speak on hate crimes and extremism, the thin blue line insignia, race-based data collection, the professional standards section complaint process, equity, diversion, and inclusion introduction, our school resource officer program, and info posts. So far, the external ARAC have identified 17 action items, which have resulted in the 3 themes I mentioned above. We have had 3 members leave our committee for professional and personal reasons. We have been meeting with all members one-on-one to discuss the progress of the committee and the next steps. We continue to ask and encourage our committee members to invite us to any town halls, their community meetings, and to bring to us other opportunities to reallocate funds through our CSIF framework. Briefly on our internal ARAC. As a reminder, our internal ARAC consists of approximately 60 people both sworn and civilian. The engagement and participation of this committee has been incredible and reflective of our commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization. Our members have shared that they want to learn more, so we have developed an anti-racism speaker series. This is a big part of our commitment to increase internal awareness and education on racism. We have invited subject matter experts who bring a variety of lived experience, education, and perspective on systemic racism. To date, we have education and training on the following topics: anti-racism terminology and concepts, a presentation on racial trauma, a presentation on unconscious bias, as well as the Black community's relationship with the police historically and the current state. We have had 2 individuals from the City of Calgary's anti-racism program team facilitate an interactive conversation about systemic racism, why this work is so hard, and why and how we can support each other on this journey. As well, we have had a strategist from the Indigenous Relations Office with the City of Calgary present on a deeper dive into residential schools, which included follow-up conversations. We have speakers booked for the rest of the year, which include a director in strategic engagement with the Calgary Catholic Immigration Society, an assistant professor in the Faculty of Social Work from the University of Calgary, and the president of the Association of Black Law Enforcers. All speaker series presentations are recorded and are publicly available. We also survey our internal committee members after each presentation. For example, 71% of our internal ARAC members were very satisfied with our last speaker and have requested more conversations on Indigenous reconciliation. In addition, 75% and 74% said that they have learned something that they did not know and the content resonated with them. And overall, 65% of internal members shared that their knowledge on anti-racism has increased as a direct result of this committee. We are working with our partners in our Learning and Recruitment Division to build on our existing training and to implement our anti-racism training, education on several different platforms. We are also building off our current speakers series to build the content for our curriculum and are ensuring we are aligning this work with the city. Overall, we have been working with many partners to assist us in the definitions of racism, systemic racism, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, white privilege, colonialism, and intersectionality. We are participating with the Alberta Association of Chiefs of Police to standardize definitions for the province. We have also been providing weekly briefing note updates to our ARAC and advisory board members on protests and other sensitive investigations for their situational awareness. And as mentioned, we continue to work with the City of Calgary and participated in their public engagement launch, which was on August 20th. Some current events. There will be a live stream event to celebrate the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, September 30th. We are working in collaboration with the City of Calgary's Indigenous Relations Office and the Calgary Fire Department to coordinate several events, including a mini powwow and hosting various dignitaries. Over the past few months, we have reviewed the missing person policy to ensure we view it through an Indigenous and anti-racist lens. We're installing 3 additional flagpoles at police headquarters to permanently fly the Treaty 7 Flat and Métis Nation Region 3 flag. We presented our Indigenous roadmap to the AECP Policing with Indigenous Police Subcommittee. We displayed red dress outside headquarters and district offices. We placed orange ribbons on our CPS marked vehicles on September 21st, marking Treaty Day, and we'll remove them after the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation on the 30th. Our diversity team also assisted with handing out backpacks to children. We attended Coloring It Forward, sponsored by the City of Calgary Indigenous Relations Office for Orange Shirt Day, and we will be attending Fort Calgary on the 30th. Members continue to wear orange ribbons as a visual sign of support and partnership with the Indigenous community, and 2 diversity resource team members participated in the Blackfoot for Children March that took place at Olympic Plaza to recognize Orange Shirt Day, in which approximately 200 people attended. Deputy Tawfik will provide updates on some hate crimes and some current investigations. Just briefly on our advisory boards, there are numerous updates which I have included in your package. With regards to time, I'm happy to take questions later. However, I do want to make a quick mention about our Youth Advisory Board, an incredible group of young men and women who are nothing but enthusiastic, optimistic, and professional. We had our 4th meeting with them in July, and the top priorities identified that they want to address include mental health, school-related issues, and other pressures and bullying. Following those priorities were police perception and brutality and addictions. We look forward to continuing to work with this amazing group of people. With respect to our commitments in response to our notice of motion, here are some very, very brief highlights. First, building a framework with dedicated internal resources to create an anti-racism strategy for the service. I've already shared quite a bit regarding this, but 2 additional points to make are, as you heard earlier, we will hear the results of Illumina's engagement with Black and Indigenous citizens. The results of this research will be valued input into the development of our strategy and provide additional insights into the themes that we have heard throughout the past year. And we are posting for a change management strategist to work with our ARAC leads in support of organizational transformation. Second, the allocation funds towards an alternative call response and service delivery model through CSIV. As of June 2021, 70% of the approved projects have kicked off. The other 30% are delayed due to civilian posting freezes and some requests through the RFP process. And 1.2 million of the committed 2021s have been spent to date. Third, conduct an independent review of the School Resource Officer Program. The SRO consultant submitted a final report with recommendations on the program. The report has been reviewed and recommendations approved in principle. We are now consulting with our partners, including the school boards, ARACs, our diversity boards, on these recommendations toward building a plan. Fourth, the evaluation of the body-worn camera. 23% of the recommendation from the body-worn camera evaluation report published February 17th have already been completed. The 3rd quarter of 2021 will focus on the finalizing of the policy and the continued expansion of the program to PACT. Fifth, collection of race-based data. The first stage of the Statistics Canada engagement was completed and submitted in August. This was a comprehensive survey of police services on the proposed race-based data collection plan. Importantly, the survey and Statistics Canada involvement is limited to race-based data collection on victims of violence and all accused persons. The next stage in the project is the analysis of the survey responses by Statistics Canada. Anticipated completion of this phase is October 31st. And finally, our Indigenous roadmap. In addition to what I've briefly mentioned, we have been very fortunate to be involved in numerous community events with our Indigenous community. Some of these include the Sacred Space development is moving forward and will be utilized by the community and internal CPS units to host gatherings and meetings with victims and witnesses of crime. The mural in the space is nearing completion by an Indigenous artist, Callum Tiki Dan, and the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth, who will be designing an app to accompany the mural, which will make the visual come to life and explain its story and meaning. We have increased education on Indigenous reconciliation to our internal ARAC members by offering a paid 12 lessons certification through the University of Alberta on Indigenous histories and contemporary issues in Canada. And aside from all our regular patrol work members that are involved in, the diversity team was heavily involved in several Indigenous community events in July and August, as noted in the report that you have. Finally, with respect to the request to have Indigenous officers in every district, we are honoring and respecting what we have heard from our community and continuing to take steps forward toward reconciliation and the plan laid out in our Indigenous roadmap. We have added a 3rd sworn constable position to the Indigenous liaison portfolio within the diversity resource team. This position is being added to support this work and to allow for sustainable and longer term connection with Indigenous communities while helping the service to be successful in succession planning. This has been a concern voiced by our community, which we are responding to, and we continue to work with our elders to explore this request. I know that was a lot of information, but it's been a couple of months, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to share what we have been involved with. Thank you.
Thanks, Deputy. Yeah, definitely a lot there. I'm going to hand it over there to Deputy Tofik and Acting Deputy Chief Ryan Aliff, and they'll speak to the crime update, which will be the final pillar in the Chief's report.
Thanks, Chief. We'll start with the crime and community safety highlights, and just to reflect back on the annual policing plan, the 5 key priorities we set for 2021 were reducing gun violence, addressing drug-related harm, reducing property crimes such as break and enter, protecting vulnerable people, and increasing road safety. So I'll frame the initial portion around that, and then we'll go to Acting Deputy Aliff for the investigative support branch update. So just to give a bit of an overview, high level, on some of the trends that we're seeing right now. As of end of August 2021, residential break and enters are down 31% from the 5-year average. That's a total of 950 occurrences per year, or 25% from 2020. So a good trend there. Commercial break and enters are down 34% from the 5-year average. That's 1,057 occurrences, and that's down 32% from 2020. Vehicle theft and theft from vehicle are down 23% from the 5-year average. That's 888 occurrences, and down 9% from 2020. So we're seeing some good reductions there on the property crime front. Some things that we're noticing as far as increases, we have seen non-domestic violence increase by 7%. That's 273 occurrences from the 5-year average. So we're seeing a bit of an increase, I think largely due to commercial robberies and some non-domestic assaults that we've been seeing. As well, social and physical disorder, we've seen a slight increase of 3% from the 5-year average, largely driven by calls such as unwanted guests. So those are a high level of just some of the overall crime trends, but I'll get into each priority one by one here. First, the drug-related harm and reducing gun violence. We've had a number of operations being conducted across the service to focus in on this. One example would be an operation that our district operations team out of District 6 did. It was focusing in on a specific residence that we received information on that might be related to property crime. Through surveillance and investigative tactics, they recovered one of 5 vehicles that were stolen from the CN rail yard near the address, and they identified 3 prolific offenders as suspects in break and enters in both Calgary and Springbank. The team collaborated with the Cochrane RCMP and executed 2 search warrants in Calgary and Strathmore, arresting 5 people and recovering property from break and enters in Calgary, Springbank, Strathmore, including 2 rifles, shotgun, taser, stolen quad, and quantities of meth and fentanyl. During that search, the additional information was discovered, leading to the identification of additional suspects in the CN rail yard break and enter. So some very good work to focus in on those priorities there. That's just one example of the highlights. For what Deputy McClellan spoke about with respect to the religious institutions and some of the places of worship are, as you recall, June 30th to July 1st, there were numerous churches that were vandalized over the course of those hours. Investigators had been working through connecting the two and collecting CCTV footage around those different crimes, and were able to put together some suspect descriptions that they put to the public. As a result of some good work by our detectives in one district general investigations unit, they were able to identify an individual involved with multiple offenses, and that individual was subsequently charged in relation to that one. As well, the arson to the memorial that was in relation to the shoes that were placed in downtown, we arrested one individual in relation to that. So the work continues on putting all those together and finding similar fact evidence. So there's potential for further charges in those ones. With respect to the priority of reducing property crime, just as an example, a citywide smash, glass break and enter series, our 6th district general investigative unit focused on. They found a series of 15 break and enters that occurred to various businesses in districts 1, 3, 6, and 8. By smashing the glass to gain entrance, The CCTV video evidence was obtained, which led to the identification of a well-known prolific offender by one of our district operations teams. As a result of that and their attempts to locate, on August 19th, they arrested the individual, charging him with numerous break and enters and also apprehending him on outstanding warrants. Further charges anticipated on that one, and the investigation continues. On the protecting vulnerable people front, I'd like to highlight one ongoing initiative that some very diligent members out of District 1 had focused on regarding the use of bear spray and caustic chemicals to commit violent crimes, primarily on the vulnerable populations. We saw between 2013 and 2018, those crimes increased by 169%. The two members focused a crime prevention initiative to look at the root cause of this, and they found that it was the disposal of those containers, and they were getting into the wrong hands. So as a result of an initiative where they worked and did a crime prevention through environmental design effort, they were able to secure some secure containers at various sites that were easy for people to access. And as a result of that, there were 6 secure bear spray bins at drop-off locations. Prior to that change, we would see typically 900 to 1,000 bear spray bottles recycled each year. Since those have been put in place, we're now seeing around 3,300 recycled that way, taking them out of the hands of people who might want to use them against others. And we looked at the number of crimes and occurrences involving caustic spray year over year. I can tell you that in 2021 to the end of July, so the first half of the year, we were at 251 occurrences. The prior year, we were at over 500. So we've cut it in half year over year. For the last 3 years, they were at least 500 plus. So some great crime prevention work by those members. So I'll move into the increasing road safety priority. July and August were the provincial focus. In July was impaired driving and the immediate roadside sanctions. In the month of August, CPS issued a total of 181 impaired contraventions, bringing our year-to-date total to 1,026. August was the highest month we've had outside of July, which of course was a focus provincially for us. And we continue to focus those efforts on combating impaired driving and working through that with the immediate sanctions program. Lastly, I will speak to an ongoing trend, or one that we see happening that we certainly would like the public to be aware of. It's escalation of violence in relation to the Facebook marketplace and online sales, buy, sell, theft, and robberies that have been occurring. Our District 8 General Investigative Unit put out a public safety warning regarding these transactions, and some people or individuals who are trying to take advantage of people who might be trying to sell their devices, etc. And in doing so, they'd either steal or commit robberies. We've had 195 total swarming and buy-sell offenses to date. Of those, 82 have involved the use of a weapon, whether it be spray or a firearm or a knife. 61% of these incidents have occurred in a school or community center parking lot. So doing an education program around where to conduct these transactions in the safest manner is what we've been focusing on. Of note, from an investigative standpoint, we've identified 56 different offenders. So it's not like it's just one group of individuals doing this. A lot of them are young offenders, and some of them are known to us, and we are following through with those individuals. We're anticipating with the release of the new iPhone that there could be an escalation of these offenses. So we're trying to do public education and awareness around these things and how to keep people safe. So those are just the highlights from my perspective. I'll turn it over to Deputy Aliff for the Bureau of Investigative Support.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ryan Aliff. I'll be filling in for Deputy Chief Cook today. We are currently sitting at 12 homicides for the year, which is an increase of 6 since our last CPC meeting in June. For reference, Edmonton just reached its 27th homicide for 2021. Last year, by this date, we had responded to our 25th homicide for the year. Our clearance this year is currently at 58%, with 7 files cleared. Of the 5 files still not cleared, 3 occurred in the last 2 months, so investigative efforts to lay charges continue. In the first 9 months of 2020, we had 7 homicides related to organized crime and gang activity. This year, we have had only 2. This would indicate that suppression and enforcement efforts by our members continue to have an impact in preventing and reducing organized crime-related shootings and homicides. Organized crime and gang-related homicides are notoriously difficult to solve, primarily due to uncooperative witnesses. On that note, the organized crime and gang homicides that occurred in 2020 are still being actively investigated by our homicide detectives, with 50%, so 5 out of 10 of these files from 2020 still not cleared. Knowing that traditionally we see higher gun violence in Calgary during the summer and that the province was lifting their COVID restrictions, we wanted to have a focused action plan to deal with the gun violence in our community, working off lessons learned from the gang strategy. Across the bureaus, we came up with a 12-week plan dubbed Operation Ceasefire to address gun violence, reduce victimization, and enhance community safety. Although a lot of this work was already taking place in many areas across the service, we pivoted other specialized work areas such as Crime Stoppers and the Source Development Team to work on these objectives for a concentrated period of time. From July 12th, when the action plan was initiated, to now, we have seized 87 crime guns, so 31 handguns, 29 shotguns, and 27 rifles, and another 388 firearms that were deemed not crime guns, including replicas and airsofts. In August, we laid 307 charges against 18 people for violence with firearms offenses. So to provide some context to that, in the previous 2 months, July, we laid 95, and June, we laid 24. By the end of August, there had been 61 shootings in Calgary, which is a 26% fewer than the same period last year. Edmonton Police reported 102 shootings for the year up to the end of August. They had a busy summer with 39 shootings in July and August alone, while Calgary had 13 during the same time period. Through August 2021, the CPS has processed and fully reported on 333 firearms. Almost half of these are rifles, but approximately 1/3 are handguns. Of note, 6 of these handguns are determined to be personally manufactured firearms, otherwise known as ghost guns. Analysis has shown that guns showing up in Calgary have been used in violent crimes elsewhere in our province. At this point, it is still unclear how these guns travel between offenders and jurisdictions, but investigative efforts are currently focused on this occurrence. We are engaged as a service with our provincial partners in law enforcement and CISA to coordinate and report on crime gun information and intelligence. To shift gears to pharmacy store robberies. Between September 2020 and September 2021, there were just under 100 pharmacy store robberies in the city of Calgary. Conversely, between September 2019 and September 2020, there were only 4. Offenders are targeting primarily opioids. It is believed these drugs are being taken by the offenders for resale, not for personal use. To address this, we assigned all of the investigations to the CPS robbery unit, and bolstered their resources with investigators from across the service. Named Operation Remedy, these investigators have written numerous production orders and executed search warrants to identify a suspect pool that we are currently focusing on. We expect to be able to lay charges as soon as this evening on at least one of the suspects, with more to come in the upcoming days and weeks. Our investigators have worked closely with provincial policing partners, specifically the EPS, who have identified one of our local offenders through arrests made in Edmonton for similar type offenses. We're also working closely with the Alberta College of Pharmacists to move forward with critical safety recommendations, one of which is time delay safes, a tactic that once employed in British Columbia to address pharmacy robberies that had an immediate impact, almost completely eliminating this type of crime. So Joel, if we're pressed for time.
Sounds good. And with that, that's the conclusion of the chief's report, and we'll turn it over to you for any questions you might have. Thanks, Ryan.
Well, thanks, Chief, and thank you to all of the deputies and others who have given those thorough presentations. I will turn now to my fellow commissioners for questions. I'll take a moment to look at our list of hands up. I'm seeing Commissioner Siddiqui. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief, Deputy Chiefs, Superintendent Rashid, for the update. Appreciate it. Especially Deputy Chief Tofik. In my naivety, I guess I never realized the damage that bear spray can cause when you're not using it for hiking and other purposes. It never occurred to me that people would use it and steal it and use it for something else. So thanks for that crime prevention and the public outreach. I have 2 questions, and I'll make, hopefully they're brief. Chief, the first one is for you. You had mentioned that in the coming days, you would be coming out with the mandatory vaccination policy or comment regarding on how the service would be moving forward. at that time, will you also be sharing, I guess, repercussions or HR items that might pertain if someone does not get the vaccination? I know other organizations have shared that, for example, Alberta Health Services, and just wondering if the service will be doing the same. I think you're on mute, Chief.
That was such a good answer too. I wish we could just go back and turn back time, but we can't.
Dang it.
Dang it. I was just going to say, yes, thank you for the question. So yes, when we announce the policy, we will deal with considerations around non-compliance as well. So that will be included.
Perfect, thank you. And then just my other questions actually for Deputy Chief McClellan. Can you comment a little bit more about your anti-racism series, the one internally that you're doing in terms of logistics? Is that purely taped and then officers and other members can watch it on their own time? Or is this something that's done in public and people attend, like a lunch and learn? Just curious on, and how has the turnout been? Are you tracking the amount of people that are coming and taking part?
Yeah, thanks very much for your question, Commissioner Siddiqui. So they are, all of the speakers come to our internal ARAC committee meetings. And so they're in addition to, and so it's most of the people that are on our internal committee, but as I shared, they are taped and people can watch them afterwards. I need to double check to see if they're on our external website. And no, in fact, I believe that they are. So there's many people that have gone in and watched them afterwards. They're quite lengthy. And it's just in relation to Inspector Martin and Manager Katie Doucette, who are able through their partnerships to reach out to these subject matter experts. And all of our speaker series have been, the attendance has been overwhelming. And right now they are just for our internal. And as I said earlier, we have about 60 people on our internal committee, and most of them have been showing up for this. But as we know, many people on our internal website have accessed that afterwards and watched and listened to them as well.
Thank you both.
Thanks for those questions, Commissioner Siddiqui. Commissioner Russell.
Thank you. This is a question for Deputy Chief McClellan as well. You mentioned that you reviewed the missing persons policy with an Indigenous lens. Are you able to share any of the general themes of changes that were identified to be needed?
I believe the room at CPS is muted once again.
Okay, that's all.
Sorry, Chair, we're just trying to determine who will answer that question. Just give us a few seconds.
Hi, it's Ryan Aliff. I'm just going to give a bit of an update on our Indigenous missing persons program right now, which does fall under our major crimes portfolio. So after looking at it through the EDI lens, we had a chance to take a look at what we were doing currently and making sure that we had accounted for everything with respect to missing and murdered Indigenous women, and we're aligning it with our current practices in the major crime section. I can give you some key findings since we did that, which was something we started after liaising with Deputy McCullen's area. So Indigenous and missing persons represent 38% of all missing persons to date in 2021. This is the highest incident rate of missing Indigenous missing persons in the past 10 years. There are no outstanding Indigenous missing persons between 2010 and 2020. There are 34 outstanding non-Indigenous missing persons between 2010 and 2020. There are currently 42% or 15 Indigenous missing persons out of a total of 36 outstanding missing persons in 2021. So there's a greater representation of Indigenous missing persons out of the bigger group. In 2021, females represent 62% of the Indigenous missing persons, and in the past 10 years, Indigenous missing persons represent approximately 25% of all missing person reports in Calgary. Something we'd never done before, but we did as a result of some of our activities in liaising with Deputy McClellan's areas. We looked at the root causes of why or what may be causing some of these Indigenous females to go missing. So those themes are collated for our review, and we're reviewing it on a monthly basis. So as of this month, some of the biggest themes, mental health and addiction issues. And so since this is the first time that we've put this report together, and it was only done yesterday, it is our intention to take the results and the themes from this and coordinate with the rest of the service to see if there's other areas that can help us in reducing some of these outstanding missing persons. And so I'm not so sure I've answered the question, but to the best of my ability, that's the insight I can give based on what we were inspired to do with respect to missing murders of Indigenous women.
And I can also add through our CSIP framework and through that reallocation of funds, we were able to allocate additional money. I think it was about $86,000 to a missing person coordinator to assist with that.
It's helpful to
Thanks very much for that question. And we look forward to hearing more as you are able to absorb and interpret the information you're getting from your recent data. Thanks very much. I'll turn now to Commissioner Cornett.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one, I know alternative response methods is very important and part of the anti-racism project overall and all of the efforts. And I wonder if you could just speak briefly to changes you've made to the PACT teams.
To the which?
PACT.
Yeah, thanks very much, Commissioner, for the question. So we've been able to, with respect to reallocation, again, through our CSIP funding, we have been able to double our PAC team. And again, I think I've mentioned before, we have an incredible working relationship with our AHS. We're now working, I think it's 22 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's a bit too early to tell what kind of impacts that we have had, but anecdotally, we have received some positive feedback.
Great, thank you. And the second question, just you commented on the Youth Advisory Council and how great they are and what they're doing. One of their top concerns was mental health in schools. Was that linked to the SRO program, or did you get any sense to what they were thinking? I know the report is due soon, but did they have any comments on that overall?
No, thanks very much again for that question. And so, no, they did not link it to the school resource officer program. It was just generally what the group had come up with, but did not make that tie to the SROs.
Great, thank you very much.
Thanks, Commissioner Cornett. Commissioner Lynch Proctor.
Thanks, Chair. I have one question for Deputy Chief McClellan and then a follow-up on the crime update. Deputy Chief, you mentioned that 3 members of the external ARAC committee have had to leave because of personal commitments. Do you have a process currently in place to find replacements for those 3 committee members and a timeline to do so?
Thanks very much for your question. So yes, personal and professional reasons, and we were able to meet with every single one of them and got some great feedback from them. The process is through consultation with the co-chair and with Inspector Martin. She's currently working with the 2 co-chairs to assess whether or not we should fill those positions. We do have some people that obviously applied the last time. I think you'll recall we had over 200 people that applied, and we do have people still wanting to join our committee. So we're in the process of currently assessing that with the 2 co-chairs on our external ARAC. And with respect to timeline, I would say probably in the next month or 2, we'll make a decision as to how and when we are going to fill those, if we do fill them.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. And then just on the crime update, are you able to provide an update on domestic violence trends over the past few months since we last met?
So hi, it's Ryan Aliff again for Deputy Cook. Domestic violence is trending downward compared to the average. In Calgary, we've seen a decline in these incidents since May 2019. So this decline is not just related to the pandemic, as some would assume. What we did see is an increase, and I believe it to be at least in part related to the restriction, is in domestic reporting. So reporting is going up, but violence is down. We have seen an increase in reporting since January 2021, and as of the end of August 2021, reporting is at the high end of a 5-year average. So reporting is good, and we encourage the reporting because that means we have insight into what's going on in Calgary. It doesn't necessarily mean things are worse. It just means things have changed a bit. Does that give you the context you're looking for?
It does. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those questions. I am not seeing any further hands up, and this may be a first. I think we may be done our Q&A session early. I will give another second though for those who want to consider the presentations. And once again, thanks to CPS for all of those presentations as well as the great responses. Well, if we don't have any more questions, once again, thanks for the presentations, and we can move on in our agenda. The next agenda item is the Executive Director's Report, agenda item number 6. I'll turn to our Executive Director, Heather Spicer, to see if there's anything you would like to share with us at this time.
Thank you. I have nothing to add today.
Thanks very much, Heather. Well, then I believe we are next going to move to the Illumina presentation. Before we get to that, Heather, do we need a few moments to ask our partners from Illumina to join, or I think I'm seeing at least some already on the call?
Yes, I think the 3 we are waiting for have joined the panelists group. Angela, can you just confirm that everyone's ready to go?
Yes, everyone has joined, so we're good.
Okay, well, thank you very much. From Illumina, I understand that we have Angela Starzuk. Is Yvonne Browers with us today?
She should be. Thought she had joined. If she hasn't, she will join shortly.
Okay.
She's planning to join. I thought she was already on, but I was just looking at the text.
I am seeing Janine DiPaolo from Illumina, as well as 2 other guests who I'll introduce momentarily. I will introduce Yvonne and Angela as individuals who we have had here several times. You've been our partners on our citizen research projects for more than a decade. And the Commission has relied on Illumina to provide advice and methods that meet the highest standards throughout all of these years. And we're very pleased to have you here today to share the results of the 2021 citizen consultation. For those who are joining us today, you should be aware that the report is included in the meeting package for our commissioners, but also on our website. It was posted today so that we could share it with CPS as well as with all Calgarians. The Commission, in collaboration with CPS, conducts research annually to understand how citizens feel about safety, about the Calgary Police Service, and also to identify opportunities to improve services for the community. For a number of years, with the help of Illumina, we have used this research to take comprehensive surveys to measure the perceptions of Calgarians on a broad range of questions. The research is one resource, but a very good resource that the Commission as well as CPS have used to inform decisions about policing priorities over these years. Last year, as you heard the Chief allude to earlier, our research told us that while feelings of satisfaction, confidence, and trust in CPS remained strong, there were increasing concerns in relation to a number of matters, including use of force, fairness, and incidents involving people in crisis. And the analysis of those results showed that Indigenous and Black Calgarians had the lowest perceptions of CPS in that survey. So coming out of that survey last year, we decided that this year we were going to use our consultation process to take a bit of a different approach in our research. We focused this consultation process rather than on a broad survey, on delving further into the experiences of Indigenous and Black Calgarians. We really wanted to use this opportunity to deepen our understanding of these citizens' perceptions of CPS and of policing more broadly. Through Illumina, our independent research partners, we held in-depth consultations with smaller groups of Calgarians representing these Black and Indigenous communities. The report that we've released today provides a summary of what was heard in those consultations. As I mentioned earlier in the meeting, the Commission only just received this report quite recently, and we are still absorbing it, and there is much to absorb. We know that the report provides a real richness of information that's going to be invaluable to Commission and to CPS, and we're looking forward to hearing more about it today. We're also looking forward to continuing to work with Illumina after this meeting today to further understand these results, and with CPS to take action to address the issues and concerns that are being highlighted in these results today. I would like to introduce two other guests who are with us today who have been instrumental in this consultation process this year. Joining the members from Illumina are Anouk Flambert and Gabrielle Lindstrom. I hope I've pronounced your names correctly. Anouk and Gabrielle are independent facilitators who are very experienced in the communities who have been surveyed or consulted in this report this year. And they facilitated and moderated online focus groups that were conducted as part of Illumina's work. And Gabrielle also conducted the Indigenous analysis that's included in the report. So we welcome all of you here today, and we will turn it over to you to give us your highlights and your observations from this report.
Thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen if that's okay, and we'll look at a few pages in the report. You're gonna see yourself maybe for 1 second. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angela Storzik, Vice President, Illumina Research Partners. And as Chair Croft just mentioned, I'm joined today by my colleagues, Yvonne Browers, Janine DePaulo, and Gabrielle Lindstrom, who may jump in throughout, add some color commentary, or help answer some questions that you may have at the end of the presentation. Unfortunately, Anouk Flambert was unable to join us today. Illumina will answer any questions that comes from the Black citizen groups. So we have about 20 minutes or so today where we're going to share the top 10 insights from the citizen consultations. Since 2017, the Commission has alternated between quantitative and qualitative research each year. The quantitative research is conducted to measure how many. So the data is analyzed and reported through numerical comparisons and statistical analysis. Whereas qualitative research, which is the type of research that we conducted this year, is a little different. Data is collected through participant observation, discussions, or interviews. We analyze the themes and then we report that in the language of the participants. So before I get into some of the research findings from this year's consultations, I'd like to start with a little bit of an overview of the methodology that we used this year. We conducted two 2-hour online focus groups with Black citizens in May and 2 2-hour discussion circles with Indigenous citizens in June on the topic of systemic racism in CPS and crisis call response. There were also a few in-depth interviews that were conducted with citizens who wanted to participate but were unable to attend the online focus groups or discussion circles. Indigenous and Black citizens were identified as a priority for this year's consultations because, as Chair Croft just mentioned, these two groups were shown to have the lowest perceptions of the Calgary Police Service in the 2020 Citizen Satisfaction Research. Citizens were recruited to participate in the consultations this year through invitations distributed by CPS diversity advisory boards, anti-racism committees, commission members, and CPS leaders. Members of the CPS Indigenous Advisory Board were also invited to participate and share that invitation. Citizens interested in participating in these groups, they called the number provided on the invitation and they were screened to ensure that they represent citizens who are 18 years of age or older, who identified as either a Black or Indigenous citizen and lived or worked in the Calgary. The participants really represented a mix of backgrounds that included both male and female participants in every group, a range of ages from 18 years of age all the way up to 67 years of age, a mix of citizens who have and have not had interactions with the Calgary Police Service, a mix of perceptions of the Calgary Police Service, either positive, neutral, or negative, and a mix of people who have and have not participated in research before. To enhance the comfort level of participants in discussing systemic racism in policing, we chose moderators with a similar cultural background to the participants. Anouk Lambert is a person of color with extensive qualitative experience, and she moderated the Black citizen online focus groups. Gabrielle Lindstrom was the moderator for the Indigenous groups. She's an Indigenous herself and has extensive experience in Indigenous methodologies and evaluation. I would also like to remind everyone that she also did the analysis and report for the Indigenous discussion circles. The reason for that was to ensure it was written from the Indigenous perspective. Next, I'm going to walk through the top 10 insights from the Black and Indigenous citizen consultations. Overall, we heard that participants felt systemic racism does exist within CPS, and we heard an overall desire from participants to see changes happen at CPS so that all individuals, regardless of race or cultural group, are treated fairly, respectfully, and in a compassionate manner. Before I jump into these 10 insights, I also wanted to mention that in the Black participant sessions, we did hear some very positive feedback. They talked about how the police are valued, they talked about how they're appreciated, and how they empathize with CPS and the very difficult job that they have. So it wasn't all negative feedback. There was also some positive as well that came out of this research. To begin with the top 10 insights, we heard from both Black and Indigenous participants that CPS treats people differently based on skin color. Black participants perceive that they are more closely scrutinized by CPS compared to others. For example, participants shared that they feel they are being pulled over and are ticketed more often, and that Black youth are often being approached by the police for no apparent reason. Furthermore, participants talked about heavier surveillance in communities with a higher concentration of BIPOC residents. Participants noted that Northeast communities are more frequently patrolled and done so with larger, intimidating-looking SUVs compared to elsewhere in the city. Indigenous participants also talked about how physical skin color makes a difference. The more visibly Indigenous one appears, the more at risk one becomes of experiencing racism. Skin color is considered a major factor in how CPS treats Indigenous citizens. Some participants described witnessing family members who are more visibly Indigenous being discriminated against. One participant described going out with friends and that she or he can pass through security just fine, but the police will stop the participants' friends just because of how they look. And similar to Black participants, Indigenous participants talked about feelings of being under constant surveillance. For example, experiences of being under surveillance by Child and Family Services after CPS has attended crisis calls at their homes, or having CPS place them and their household under heavy surveillance. Both Indigenous and Black citizens perceive that CPS officers view them as less credible and that white citizens receive preferential treatment. For example, Black participants describe CPS as preferring to talk to Caucasian colleagues at their place of work. A few Indigenous participants shared CPS singling out Indigenous people for harsher treatment. Furthermore, Indigenous participants shared that their white partners would be listened to during 911 calls, while their concerns went unacknowledged or not believed. The second insight that I want to talk about is the avoidance of fear of police by Indigenous and Black citizens or participants. Participants shared a general fear of police that motivates them to avoid interactions with CPS. There are differences in the reasons for this fear. For Black participants, this fear often stems from police brutality in their country of origin and what they have observed in the media. For Indigenous participants, this fear relates to poor treatment and colonialism here in Canada. So what is colonialism? Settler colonialism can be defined as a system underlain with racist ideologies that structure our economic, legal, and social systems. Colonialism seeks to destroy the identity and nationhood of Indigenous nations in order to replace it with a Eurocentric cultural paradigm that naturalizes encroachment and occupation of Indigenous lands. The findings from the Indigenous citizen consultation support the continuation of colonial practices. Even today, Indigenous participants mentioned traumatic childhoods resulting from the 60s scoop, the impact of residential schools, a fear of child and family services, distrust of social workers, and a child welfare system that continues to work towards the removal of Indigenous children from their families. Encounters with CPS can trigger physical and mental responses associated with trauma. As a result, incidents of violence and victimization may go unreported, as Indigenous people would rather avoid dealing with the police because of this trauma and fear that they have that accompanies their dealings with police. For example, one participant described a real hesitancy to call 911 despite her child having a severe allergic reaction. Others expressed fear due to just what they've seen in the media. The third insight is that treatment by CPS is influenced by stereotypes. Indigenous citizens mentioned being associated with stereotypes such as the drunken Indian, while Black participants talk about how they are perceived as thugs and thieves. These stereotypes are thought to contribute to CPS targeting them unjustly. This leads to the fourth key insight. There is a general lack of trust in CPS among both Black and Indigenous participants. Participants spoke of avoiding contact with CPS out of concern that they would not be treated fairly or respectfully. Participants described different situations, illustrating their deep distrust of CPS. Black participants described not being able to trust that CPS wasn't targeting them based on their skin color. For example, when they're being pulled over by the CPS, they are not sure whether it is because they actually did something wrong, or is it because of their skin color. Among Indigenous participants, one expressed fear and distrust at the thought of ever having to be apprehended by CPS, and did all they could to ensure that they conducted themselves in a civil manner in accordance with the law. Furthermore, we also heard about a real lack of trust in CPS by Indigenous women. Participants shared situations of unfair and discriminatory treatment. For example, one participant shared that she was pulled over and questioned like she was a prostitute just because of the area she was driving in. Indigenous participants also expressed that they feel they are at risk of having their children taken away during crisis calls. Others expressed fear their children would be apprehended. The fifth key insight is that the media also influences perceptions of CPS. Both Black and Indigenous citizens describe seeing incidents of violence through the media sources, which increase the fear and distrust of CPS. Now, this violence can be violence that they've seen of videos of CPS, or that could be violence that they see in the States or in other parts of the country. So it's a real mix of both, but wherever it is, it really influences perceptions of CPS and it increases their fear and distrust. The sixth insight is that Black and Indigenous participants have a deep desire for better treatment by CPS. Participants indicate they want CPS to appreciate where they have come from, what they have experienced, and understand how it impacts their impressions and experiences with CPS. Black participants want to be able to trust that officers will be there to service their needs in a fair and respectful manner. Indigenous participants want to trust that CPS will offer unbiased, non-judgmental, and culturally sensitive support. So this leads me to the seventh key insight. There is support for alternative call response among both Black and Indigenous participants. Alternative call response is where other trained professionals like social workers, healthcare workers, mental health workers can attend crisis calls with CPS, such as for mental health, addiction, homelessness, post-traumatic stress disorder, domestic violence, and other challenges. Black participants shared that they feel a police officer should accompany the other trained professionals in order to protect the safety of those on scene. However, generally speaking, Black participants indicated that the officer is there as backup and only to be called to the forefront as necessary in order to avoid unintentionally escalating the situation. For Indigenous participants, negative associations with social workers and healthcare workers means that these may not be the right people or right professionals to attend crisis calls with Indigenous citizens. An Indigenous liaison was suggested as a possible solution. A few Indigenous participants also shared that they would be comfortable with other trained professionals like a mental health worker, just not a social worker. The need to address systemic racism within CPS is the next key insight. Participants spoke of a need for more diversity within the ranks of CPS that includes representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color at all levels of the organization. Mandatory anti-racism and cultural competency training was suggested for CPS officers, as well as inclusion initiatives to encourage greater involvement of CPS in the communities it serves and to help them get to know the people that are in those communities on a personal level. Some examples include attending weekly church services, maybe spending time on reserves in a non-policing role, or taking part in things like sweat lodges. Black and Indigenous participants both shared that they would like better accountability by CPS. First, they would like increased transparency of investigations, body-worn camera data, and statistics related to CPS diversity, street checks, and race-based data collection. Participants also support the use of body-worn cameras to give line of sight into what happens during citizen interactions. And third, participants would like implementation of external review processes for investigations of CPS officers. Black participants also mentioned using external parties for analysis of race-based data and street check data for increased accountability and credibility. The last insight is that both Black and Indigenous participants felt the use of force should be a last resort. The role of a police officer should be to de-escalate situations, calm people down, and assist in a non-judgmental, fair, respectful, and compassionate way. Participants want to be treated respectfully and fairly in all interactions with CPS. Chair Croft, this concludes our presentation for today.
Well, thank you very much, Angela, for that excellent summary. I know that my colleagues will have a number of questions and looking forward to this discussion. I will turn to our hands to see who has lined up to ask questions. Commissioner Cornett.
I just have an initial question that's little administrative, but you listed 10 insights. Are those ranked in any way in terms of how strong they were or which would be addressed?
No,
What does that look like?
I wouldn't, sorry, but I wouldn't say they're ranked in any particular order. These are 10 very strong themes that we're seeing throughout both the Indigenous and Black participant groups. So they're the areas where we're seeing a lot of overlap between the two.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mallon and then Commissioner Siddiqui.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered in the responses you got, whether or not there was any distinction between a youth response versus an adult response. And I did notice in the report in another section that there were comments made about the SRO program in the school. So I wondered if you noticed any distinction between adult and youth responses.
Everyone that participated in the groups was an adult, so the youngest was 18 years of age. There were a couple of younger participants that did talk about the school resource programs, and they had different experiences. Some were positive and some were negative. But for the most part, a lot of people actually didn't understand the school resource program. They didn't really understand what it was about. So they had some concerns. Well, some people liked the idea. They thought there was a lot of positive to it. They thought that it could be a good role model for kids, particularly if the officers interact with the kids and have a good relationship with the children at the school. But on the other hand, people were concerned that it could be viewed as racist if it's only in certain schools. So there was a mix for sure.
Thank you.
Commissioner Siddiqui.
Thanks so much, Angela and team, for the report. Especially appreciate the fact that you used moderators with both groups that reflected the cultural backgrounds. I think that's fantastic. Sorry, I've got the sun in my eyes, so I kind of keep moving back and forth, so I apologize for that. I have two questions. In the Black Canadian survey group, can you share, I'm just curious if you had a breakdown of how many were new Canadians and maybe how many were second or third generation Black Canadians? I'm just curious, and if their responses were different.
I don't know the answer of that off the top of my head. We might be able to answer it in a minute. I think Janine DePaulo has a breakdown of what generation we had, but I'm sure she has to look it up.
No worries.
We did have a mix, I just can't remember. Yeah.
That's fine. I saw a mention in the report, but I wasn't sure if there was a slight mention, but I wasn't sure if that indicated the way their answers would come across too. So I'm just curious about that. The second question I had is that both survey groups indicated that the service should have officers that reflect the community in all various, across all roles, I should say. Was there any input from them on how they could support that so that people from these communities would want to become police officers? I know you commented on the community event, but was there anything specific about recruitment and all that?
No, they didn't get into the idea of how that could be done, unfortunately. They talked about the fact that they definitely wanted that representation, that they didn't see it today. But we didn't get into, there wasn't any input into how to get there. Most of the input, this is off a little bit broader, but to deal with systemic racism revolved around training and inclusion. So.
Fantastic. And then I guess, I don't know if you got into it again. Sorry, my last question is the people who mentioned the community events and places that the officers could be more visible. Were they, was there any offer of supporting that and helping? Just because, I mean, this group is a little warmer now, so I'm wondering if they would be helpful in making some inroads with the service and vice versa.
Gabrielle, what would be your thoughts on that with the Indigenous participants?
Thank you very much for that. In terms of how the Indigenous people can support the Calgary Police Service in becoming more active in the community, is that the question? Well, I think one huge thing is minimize racism. That's what needs to happen. And it shouldn't be the Indigenous people's responsibility to invite racist cops into the community where they're further at risk of being treated with racism. So the expectation there is that the Calgary Police Service would learn from these perspectives, this research, build in critical anti-racist training in ways that would reverse or at least minimize racism. It's pretty hard for Indigenous people, and I speaking from an Indigenous perspective myself, I am reticent to invite police into whatever I'm doing for some of those reasons that were in the research. So I don't have any answers around that, except for that racism needs to be addressed in the Calgary Police Services, and it shouldn't be the Indigenous people's responsibility to figure out how that needs to be done. We can provide recommendations and we could provide perspectives, but I think that learning needs to really be on the shoulders of the Calgary Police Service.
Thanks very much for that question and that response. I have a number of questions of my own, but I'm seeing other hands go up, so I'll save my own for a bit. I'm seeing Commissioner Mallon, did you have a follow-up question to earlier?
No, sorry, I keep forgetting to put my hand down.
Okay, and Commissioner Cornett?
Yes, I just had a question. I've done a fair bit of surveying in my past, although somewhat ancient past. And I read the description here, the difference between qualitative and quantitative research. But I wonder if you could just state, because the sample size here, and I know it's not about numbers, but how do we or do you respond to the fact that there were a total of 15 Black people involved and 12 Indigenous? So it's just helpful for us to be able to explain. I mean, it's hugely valuable and I appreciate all of this, but how do we then talk about this in a broader audience?
Right. So I have two things I want to, just going to backtrack before I answer your question. I was asked about first generation and second generation in the Black citizen groups. So we had about a third of them saying they were immigrants. Just over, we had just a few more that said that they were first generation. And then we had a couple that said they were second generation. And there were about 4 people out of that didn't want to respond on that. So that sort of gives you a breakdown. So we did have a mix of different generations there. As far as the second question there is, so you're really asking how can we be confident in the results and ensure they're valid, and how do we interpret those? So qualitative research really is focused on gathering those in-depth insights from participants to give us a more complete understanding of the different perspectives and why people feel a certain way. It's really valuable for capturing that range of opinions and really understanding those opinions. So our success for qualitative research is measured by the quality of the responses we get and really that deep depth of information that we obtain, which you can see in our report that we've provided. It's very extensive, lots of feedback there. The results of qualitative research, though, they're not statistically projectable to the population at large. So we can't say that they represent the perspectives of all Black citizens or all Indigenous citizens, just because it is such a very small group of people. The online consultations were really developed to get a deeper understanding of the why behind the 2020 results and why their perceptions were low, but also really focusing on your topic of understanding in depth. Is there systemic racism at CPS and why do they feel that way? And what about alternative call response? Is this something that they would be interested in really understanding those deeper perspectives on that? The value of this type of research is that they can communicate in their own words and at their own level of passion and tell you how they feel about these things and why. And that's how you can really get that deep understanding on different topics.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And as I indicated, I have some questions of my own, but I'm going to start by departing from the guidance I gave earlier in the meeting that we will not have the ability to monitor the chat line, because I did have a quick look at the Q&A and there's a question there that I think it's a very good one, and I think it relates to what you were just discussing in terms of methodology. One of our public participants is asking who were the participants, and I don't know that that is something you're able to share. I suspect that's something that you have provided confidentiality on, but perhaps I'll let you speak to that in a moment. But the question goes on to say, please be specific and never speak for a whole race of people. I will turn it to you to tell us how you would respond to that. I think you just addressed it, at least in part, by telling us that if this isn't meant to, and we can't, in this kind of a survey, be representative of a whole race of people. But I guess, to what extent do you think that you were able to draw out what is no doubt a varied range of perspectives within the variety of Black communities, Indigenous communities that we have making up the community of Calgary?
So to begin, we definitely can't tell you who the participants are. That is confidential for sure. I will say that we did have a really good range of individuals in both groups that really spanned different backgrounds, different ages, male and female perspectives. So you are getting a very wide range and diverse mix. We did hear, and one of the goals from CPS was to hear from people who had never ever participated in any type of research before, not just qualitative, but any type of research. And actually over half, I think it was, can't remember the exact number, over 2/3, I think I have it here somewhere, actually have never participated in research. So we have the opportunity, got the opportunity in this to actually hear from people you wouldn't normally hear from, which was amazing. As far as the representation of their views, we can't say this is representative of all Black citizens or all Indigenous citizens. I think maybe Gabrielle might want to speak to this and say how she feels as far as what she's done. She has a vast background in doing research with Indigenous. She might be able to add a little more context to whether she feels that these groups were different or similar to things you might have heard in other work that she's done.
I would very much like to hear Gabrielle's perspectives. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And I think I just want to acknowledge that, speaking for an entire ethnicity and an entire group of an entire culture is a difficult thing to do. And that's often what these kinds of research around, and that's what research does anyways, whenever we're studying human phenomenon or whatever, it's up to the researcher to make these interpretations, and indeed what they end up doing is speaking on behalf of entire races, right? And that's what research does. And so from my perspective and who I am, I think it's really important that you know who I am, even though that's in the report. But my name is Tsabinaki. That name was gifted to me by my father when I graduated from my master's degree. with my master's degree. When I graduated with my PhD, I'm due for another name. So I grew up in these territories. I'm Nitsitapi, I'm a Blackfoot woman. And so not only that, but I also have a lot of experience working within the research field, both qualitative, and I've done some quantitative research. What quantitative research allows us to do is distance ourselves from these human problems. So we begin to see human phenomenon in the context of numbers rather than stories. Now, what was able to happen within these focus groups, at least from what I was able to ascertain in the focus groups that I led, was a representative sample of Indigenous people that was fairly broad. And I think accurately represented the various groups in the Treaty 7 area. We also had a few Métis participants as well. It's no surprise that Inuit people weren't here because weren't in the focus groups because Inuit people make up such a small percentage of the population in Alberta. So to your question, yes, I think that I can when I generalized, made some what I believe are accurate generalizations in my report. I'm confident in their accuracy and their ability to represent Indigenous peoples and their experiences with racism with respect to the Calgary Police Services. So I'm confident in that. Absolutely. Do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people? Of course not. That's why I declared my cultural location in the report. I can't do that. But I can interpret from a place of lived experience as an Nitsitapi person, which is going to be very different than somebody who's a white person and speaking on behalf of Indigenous people. That's problematic. And so that's how my understanding of this research. And so another question here from Yvonne, I'm just going to go ahead and answer that. Are these people directly from Treaty 7? Are they houseless? So are they part of the the homeless population? To my understanding, so we did have people who were also from the Treaty 7, but we also had some representation from other groups as well. In terms of whether they were houseless, we didn't really get into that degree of depth of their situation, right? And so we really didn't focus so much on their own personal situation, but certainly their perceptions. And so in terms of where the Indigenous houseless people came in was that they were exposed to racism more than any other population, any other Indigenous people. Were they city employees? I'm not sure. Yes, community members, all members of the community. Were they paid? I think a small research stipend was provided to them to compensate them for their participation in this. How much did this survey of 30 people cost us? I just want to make a statement here in terms of these kinds of perspectives and these kinds of questions. Now, those kinds of questions that somehow this kind of research, finding out the perspectives of how racism impacts people, it actually costs people money, taxpayers money. That is indicative of settler colonialism. That is an example of settler colonialism right there. And so it's not just about, it doesn't become about the experiences of racism. It becomes about money and taxpayers' money and how much it costs. So we're more concerned about materialism and money than we are about how we treat each other as human beings. So I wanted to say that because I'm very disappointed in that question.
Thanks very much for those responses. I I'm sure others has found your explanation of the difference between qualitative and quantitative research and the impact of that difference is really fascinating, and it's something I will reread the report, keeping that in mind. In terms of this great response that you gave also on the breadth of perspectives that you think you were able to bring and tap into in this report. One of the questions that we might have both for the communities that you were involved in interviewing and the Black representatives who were involved might be for future research of this type that we might engage in down the road. If there are other perspectives we should seek out that might not have found their way this time, and we'll learn more every time we do research about what might be missing from the perspectives that we're gaining. And you have really valuable insights into that as well, no doubt. So thank you very much. Not seeing any other hands up, we'll take this opportunity to ask a couple of questions myself. Generally, I guess a broad question about how we use this report. The primary purpose of it, of course, was to develop an understanding of experiences and perceptions. And you had a really great, Gabriella, comment that it can't be the job of you and your communities to provide the answers. But are there any suggestions that might have jumped out at you or others from Illumina about what the participants, what might be impactful for the participants to help them gain the trust that they clearly don't always have in encounters with CPS?
I think when we were going through and listening to the participants, the key theme that kept coming up is to treat them like a human being, and don't treat them by the color of their skin or by their culture or their race. You want to treat them as a human being in a fair, respectful manner, just like you would treat your family members, right? Or your friends. You want to treat people respectfully and fairly. And that came up over and over and over again. And that is what all participants wanted for every Black, Indigenous, and person of color. They really wanted that to happen. They didn't have all the solutions. Training came up a lot. It doesn't mean it's the full solution, but that's part of the solution. I think finding ways to reduce that racism within CPS, as Gabrielle was talking about, is going to be critical, because it's those experiences that are positive that are going to make the difference in the long run in changing perceptions of the community. Yvonne, did you want to add something?
No, I think you summarized it well, Angela.
Maybe
I
I
think
can, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabrielle.
No, I just wanted to also mention in terms of the Indigenous focus group. So some of the direct, more, I guess you could say, palpable ways to address the systemic racism within CPS are around that increasing awareness, increasing awareness pathways for addressing racism and this need for more accountability. So this was an important piece as well. So the mandatory awareness training was seen as a possible solution to mitigate systemic racism and to support CPS in helping to better understand Indigenous people's experiences with trauma. And another participant suggested that CPS need more training to identify their own internalized racism. So how they've, as non-Indigenous people, are internalizing racism and naturalizing racism within their ranks, which really points away from Indigenous awareness and into anti-racism, anti-oppression education. There was also the suggestion that CPS should work more closely closely with other professionals because officers did not possess the expertise to effectively meet the needs of Indigenous people. This is from the perceptions of the focus groups, especially during crisis calls. So having an Indigenous liaison attend during these crisis calls was seen as another possible solution. So just a need for greater accountability. CPS need to implement practices that would increase their accountability. Some of these could include ensuring more Indigenous officers were included. And see, now this is we can include more Indigenous people. Inclusion isn't the answer if the system remains racism and remains racist and the policies remain racist. So you can include as much as you want, but if the system itself remains unchanged, then we'll have that leaving, more Indigenous people leaving. So what is needed is actually some kind of cultural security, some kind of policy that's embedded in the CPS that would allow for increasing this accountability. I wanted to say something here as well about learning from the positive experiences with CPS, and this is important too, because as Angela mentioned, not everything was negative, and certainly, you know, I didn't do the Black focus groups, but from what I understand, they had quite more positive experiences. But much of the feedback that was provided by the Indigenous participants certainly revolved around negative experiences. But it's important to note as well that there were some positive incidents that were cited by some of these by some of the participants. And then understanding what the role of the CPS is in these crisis calls is really important. They're supposed to be peacekeepers, and they're supposed to be seen as protecting and being a source of safety and security. But instead, that's not happening. So really, these were some ways and some suggestions that were offered by the participants in terms of pathways forward that CPS needs to look at in addressing this racism.
Thank you very much. There's so much in there. I was struck when I read the report, and I was struck by your comments, and Angela's as well, about the positive experiences, and your comment about learning from that is an important one. And to me, I don't know if I'm going to phrase this question very well, so I apologize if I don't, but I think we all struggle with how to address these incredibly challenging hurdles we have to address the systemic racism, systemic biases that we know exist in our society and exist in policing, which are systemic matters that have been embedded in the fabric of the organization systems and how everything works. And then there are actual incidents that form the views of people, their experiences based on individual interactions with individuals. So there's the experiences that you're drawing on for this research are informed by all of those things and perceptions formed from other places as well. In addressing these problems and many of the discussions we've had with CPS and around policing over quite some time, particularly as we've been setting up anti-racism committees and really digging in deeper to this work, it's how do we bridge the desire and the feeling within CPS that there is a lot of good work being done with the fact that we are still hearing that there are negative perceptions as well. And although intellectually we can say, well, just because there are many people who have concerns, who have negative perceptions, negative experiences, does not mean that every single experience is a negative one, and you're underscoring that here. But how might we explain this research and the learnings from it, to members of CPS who feel that they are trying to change, trying to be the best, offer the best services they can. And many times, or most times, when people go out and interact with Calgarians, the services are positive. If that is the perception of those within CPS, that they are trying super hard to address these problems, how do we bridge the negative feedback that we're getting and allow people to understand how that can be incorporated into all of the good work that is being done to help that good work be even more impactful, to understand how to take it into context and use it positively?
I'll start with something that we know from many years of research, is that it takes time to change perceptions. And there's been many, many years and a long history of systemic racism, in our society, impacting Black citizens, Indigenous citizens, and other people of color. And I think it's yes, there's a lot of negative feedback here, but that was the topic. It was systemic racism in CPS. That's what we asked them for. What was powerful about it is we did hear some very positive feedback as well. I think there is that perception, particularly among the Black citizens, that policing is valued. They appreciate it. They feel police are needed, right? It's not that they want them to go away and not have police anymore. They really emphasize and empathize with them as well, right? They understand they're performing an incredibly difficult job in today's society, but they're hopeful. So I think it's not going to be a short-term ride. It's a long-term journey where changing those perceptions is going to take a long time. It's not all negative, but that's what we asked about as well. We asked, is there systemic racism? And they're telling us their stories. They're telling us their experiences. And what that tells us is that it still exists. And I totally understand CPS is working really hard to make changes. They've been on a path to address this, but addressing systemic racism, both in policing and our society, is really a difficult challenge, and it's going to take a long time. And I think for the CPS, they have to balance this as this is what's happening and this is how we are being perceived today. And let's hope over the next, however many years, that we can start to hear more positive feedback from people. They're starting to have more positive relationships with CPS because CPS is starting to make those changes. But we know they're not going to make all those changes in the next 6 months or a year. It's not possible, right? So it's going to take time.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think what happens a lot of the times, especially when it comes to discussions about racism, is we have, like, we're speaking the same language, but our meanings are different. Our interpretations and our meanings are different. For Indigenous people, racism, the way it's defined in our law books, or it doesn't encompass how we experience it. So I've written about that in the report, that the unstable nature of what we define as racism is what gives it its power. And also too, the negative feelings that are evoked when discussions of racism are brought to bear in our social systems. Racism has become so functional in our society that we can't even have discussions about it without people feeling hot under the collar, or upset, or feeling like they're accused of racism, or what have you. there's no question about this work here that the CPS is, we didn't call into question, the question wasn't, are the CPS doing a bad job? Are they bad people working? Are there bad people working in the CPS? It was what degree of experiences, what degree do Indigenous people experience racism with? What are their perceptions of how they've experienced racism within the CPS? So it's not, it shouldn't be reduced to individuals, but that's what it often is. So how do you bridge, you know, the good work that people are doing in the community, non-Indigenous people, and also with these kinds of findings, which I don't think are negative at all. The findings are the findings. We're the ones, people attribute meaning to them and assign value to them based on where they are in their own reality, right? And so I'm going to read a little bit of an excerpt on some other research that I was doing in terms of that might offer some solutions for bridging this, or at least some critical reflections. So addressing the colonial legacy within our social systems must be seen as a key priority in all levels of government, business, education, not-for-profit sectors, and the legal system. Building critical anti-colonial knowledge capacity can be achieved through anti-racism training modalities that integrate Indigenous philosophy and elements of Indigenous pedagogy. Indigenous awareness training has been identified as a common learning modality for non-Indigenous workers to improve their ability to work with Indigenous people. The role of ongoing professional development has been identified as a significant factor in promoting good intercultural relations between non-Indigenous and Indigenous people. But for this to happen, individual workers and managers need to be critically aware of how they're using their power in their role. Delivering knowledge about the aims of settler colonial power must be brought into any professional development program that focuses on Indigenous people. The punitive nature surrounding mistakes is part of the reason why many non-Indigenous people are afraid to learn from Indigenous people or about Indigenous people. Mistakes must be reframed as gifts of learning rather than a source of shame. But when mistakes are made in terms of building new relationships with Indigenous people, members of non-Indigenous society must still be accountable for their mistakes and learn from them. And in terms of Indigenous cultural competency initiatives, it must be accepted that these approaches are not enough to build and strengthen intercultural relational capacity within mainstream society in ways that will enable the integration of other ways of knowing without overwhelming or appropriating them. So currently, the settler colonial worldview does not allow for paradigm shifts that would reframe and reorganize social and cultural hierarchies. So Indigenous awareness and inclusion initiatives, again, are not enough to build the kind of capacity that is needed to transform relationships between Indigenous people and the Calgary Police Services. Instead, Indigenous awareness training initiatives, and even the way our conversations around racism, they tend to appear to cater to the comfort levels of non-Indigenous people, often leading to the reinforcement of stereotypes and encouraging the continued objectification of Indigenous cultures. So professional development and educational programming require a conceptual overhaul with reliance on Indigenous perspectives in order to right power imbalances, to restore balance. That's what's required, as opposed to Western approaches that tend to focus on filling in the gaps of filling in the knowledge gaps of individuals, rather than critically reflecting on the broader patterns of oppression that lead to the marginalization of Indigenous people. So these are some ideas and some reflections about our current training modalities, professional development training modalities. We've been doing Indigenous awareness training for I don't know how long. It was incorporated in the 80s, and then now in the 90s. Now we're still doing it. I don't know of any empirical studies that provide evidence-based findings that speak to the efficacy of Indigenous awareness training. I can tell you myself as an Indigenous person, I haven't experienced any less racism now than when I was a young woman. And so to your point about Benita, about how can we bridge this, it's about reframing. And it's about really leaning into that discomfort, that discussions that racism bring. And, you know, it's not shying away from these kinds of perspectives. And it's like, you know, we all do good work. We all try to do good work. And it's not about pointing the fingers that these are bad cops, bad people. That's what racism tends to evoke, you know, oh, I'm a bad person, that's how we, rather than seeing racism really as this system of power and an ideology that drives policies in very nuanced and oftentimes very hidden ways. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful, and there's so much to think about from what you just said. If I could paraphrase just part of it, I think it's that two things can be true, that there can be many people in leadership at CPS and throughout the organization, many people in the organization as a whole who are doing really great work on this and who are very committed to the change that needs to happen. But at the same time, we can also have people who still have experiences that are negative for them, that are perpetuating their negative perceptions of policing and of CPS. And there's a lot that we still need to learn about how those perceptions get created, and even much more difficult, how to reframe, how to change those experiences, and how to recreate that trust. But there's a lot of hope I'm hearing from you that can be done. One of the things it's clear is that while we're hearing a lot of calls for more training, there's also a lot of call for better training, for evaluating the effectiveness of it, because the same old training that has been done for a long time that you referred to may not be working, and taking a look at what are more modern, better approaches, and including the range of perspectives that we talked about earlier, clearly are a couple of the things that we will need to do going forward that I know are already part of our action plans, but what your comments have just underscored the huge importance of that aspect of it to us, because training is one of the key parts of the action plans, and we have to know if that's working.
I think so, Benita, absolutely. And also too is, you know, being realistic and really learning from the data and from the perspectives and hard, you know, understanding that, you know, hard work, the hard work of the Calgary Police Services, you know, that hard work is one thing, but heart work is another thing. And that's what's required in relationship building, is heart work, caring, compassion, and empathy. And I don't really, that isn't something that really came out in the at all in the focus groups. But yet that's what's required in order to feel safe, is that the person that is supposedly there to protect you actually cares about your well-being. And I call into question whether or not that's the case really. And so what do we mean by caring? You know, so that's about reframing relationships. And it's good to focus on the good work that people are doing and the positive stuff that people are doing. But I mean, we can't just try and see things through rose-colored glasses. We really need to focus on these voices. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. And to be quite honest, I don't know. I'm curious as an Indigenous citizen myself, what the next steps are in terms of what the Calgary Police Services are going to do. So I don't think focusing on the great work that's happening to sideline these kind of things, that's not helpful. We need to deal with the issue, and that is racism in the Calgary Police Service. That's what it is. The good work, okay, yeah, fine, but this is the issue.
And on that note, I see that the people in the room at Calgary Police Service have raised their hand with a question, and I will give them an opportunity to ask right now. Thanks again, Gabrielle.
Yeah, thanks very much. A comment and a question. And I guess the comment would just be to say, I think this is great. And we were talking in here as well. I think the report and the work that's been done here is good work. We understand the limitations of it because of the sample, but we also understand that we got to the voices that we were wanting to hear. And we legitimately do. And so the messages that are in there are some pretty basic messages in some ways. You know, people want a fair and respectful treatment, and they want to be treated with compassion. And to Gabrielle's point, you know, they want the feeling that when people come there, that when police come, that they care. And that's all consistent with our values. That's what people come for. So the reality of it is that's not translating in some of these in some of the instances, and we have to know that. I love the fact that we are putting the spin on it to say, yes, there's these issues that we're hearing in the report. And, you know, I thought some things jumped out for me there around the importance of intergenerational trauma. And it's clear that the history of the Black and Indigenous communities did not evolve in the same way as the general population. And there's some things that police officers need to know about that, because when you have interactions with members of the community, sometimes it's not going to go well for good and valid reasons. And our folks need to know that also. I think having the relationship and having the opportunity to hear these voices and then take that back into the context of what we're doing, I think is really good. I do think that, again, centering this on a foundation to say, fundamentally, there's lots of good things going on, and the intentions are good, but it's not good enough yet. And we 100% get that. Just going over to my question there now, I just wanted to ask Yvonne, because I know last year, you know, this focused research this year in the off year came out of the qualitative research from last year. And if I remember correctly, and if I put you on the spot here, don't worry about it, but you probably remember, either Yvonne or Angela there, the Black and Indigenous community were lower than the quantitative average, but it wasn't that much lower.
Quantitative, yeah.
Yeah, we were actually starting in a pretty good place. It wasn't like it was in the basement, but it was lower. And that's the point. And that's why we wanted to focus in on it. Do I have that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So when we did the analysis of the 2020 quantitative results, what we did as part of the analysis was looking at, were there differences by different racial groups? And what we found is that Indigenous peoples rated the Calgary Police Service the lowest, and Black citizens the second lowest. Now, having said that, I do not have the report in front of me in my London location here. Angela and Janine do have the report, but the numbers are not incredibly low. It was a relative looking at where are the ratings highest and where are the ratings lowest. So, and that was the whole reason that Indigenous and Black citizens were selected. And that's where we really wanted to dive in deep and understand. Angela, is there anything that you wanted to add to that? Yeah, you've got
Sorry,
your.
I was muted. No, I think you said it well. You're correct. You know, it was a comparative analysis that showed that the perceptions of the Black citizens and the Indigenous citizens were the lower perceptions compared to other cultural groups. And if I seem to recall correctly, I think Caucasian was sort of like the middle of the road, the average. So yeah, some cultural groups like Indigenous and Black had lower perceptions, whereas there were some other cultural groups that had much higher perceptions. So yeah.
I think that demonstrates the importance of being able to cross-cut the data and look at those segments of the community so we can see that. And so this is a place we need to focus, and so we are. But I think just situating that, the fact that I think everybody, when I think of the members of the service who are doing good work, everybody does better from a place of encouragement as opposed to everything's bad. So I think to Gabrielle's point, just being able to frame that to say, we're not saying everything's good, let's silence these voices. We're saying we're starting with some good things. Let's make sure we amplify these voices and let's pay attention to what they're saying because the messages are very important. So I just wanted to finish up by saying thanks to Gabriella for the work there and for your obvious passion about this. And also to Anouk, I know she's not on the call, but we appreciate her work as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I just quickly say something about your comment? It reminded me of something in some of the research that I'm currently looking at right now. It's around intergenerational trauma. You mentioned intergenerational trauma and the fact that Indigenous and Black citizens evolve differently in regards to the rest of the population because of intergenerational trauma. So colonization is sort of a two-pronged thing when it comes to, and I can only speak from an Indigenous perspective. Colonization is a two-pronged thing, and it impacts all of us in very, very specific ways. For Indigenous people, we experience this intergenerational trauma. For non-Indigenous people, particularly white settlers, they experience intergenerational apathy. So this apathy is passed down along generations and has been done for years and years and years and years. So colonization, it's this intergenerational apathy that has actually allowed colonization to flourish and structure our society and you know, give people the confidence to kind of label who's evolved and who's not evolved and you know, things like that, and make these kinds of generalizations and things like that. So and you know, it's important to keep in mind that colonization isn't something that just Indigenous people are experiencing. Colonization is something that impacts all of us. And so we have on one hand intergenerational trauma, on the other hand we have intergenerational racism, essentially, that keeps getting handed down and normalized in settler families in ways that are perpetuated in our education system, that are perpetuated in our everyday dialogues, and in our inability to even talk about racism in ways that would allow us to really strategize from a really human perspective about what we can do to recognize our human gifts and our human strengths and transcend color and all of that. So that's another lesson, I think, that can come out of this as well. So I just wanted to provide that comment.
Well, thank you again for that and for all of your incredibly insightful comments and the work that you have all done on this report. Clearly, this is a conversation that could go on for a lot longer, and I've learned so much, and a willingness to learn is really at the core of so much of this work. And I know that on behalf of all of my fellow commissioners who are very willing and desirous of learning, I thank you very much for the help you've given us on that today and in this report. And we know that we will be doing more work as we move forward in figuring out what we take from this and what actions we can take to address the concerns that your report has highlighted so well. So thanks once again. And as we indicated earlier, if the Illumina folks could stay on for the media portion of our call. We expect that our media partners will have questions at that time as well. So thank you once again. So we will now turn to our agenda. And we don't have too much more on our agenda to cover before we get to the public participation of our agenda. We just have one more agenda item, which is the representative updates. And that's updates from our commissioners who represent us on various other organizations. There have been some brief updates for commissioners in the materials. Did anybody have any additions or to those or any questions on them? I'll turn to my commissioners for that. Well, seeing none, I thank those commissioners who sit on the various committees on our behalf and for providing those materials. So now we can turn to the public participation portion of our agenda. So that is the end of our presentations and questions. And we will at this time invite our public guests to make comments. Those who have registered in advance with the CPS or CPC staff are in the queue to speak. Heather, I expect that it is you who is helping with those calls for this time around. Heather will invite you to unmute yourself one at a time. A quick reminder, you will have up to 3 minutes to speak and you should direct your comments to the chair, this being a commission meeting. We will accept your comments as information. Another note, anybody who would like to discuss a complaint against an officer should contact our public complaint director or CPS's professional standards section, or PSS. Also, a reminder to our media partners, once again, that we'll hear from our citizens first, then we'll end the public meeting before moving into the media scrum. So Heather, are we ready for questions now?
Yes, we are. And our first public participant is Adam Messiah, and we'll just give him a minute to unmute.
Okay. Welcome, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Adam, if you're there, you can go ahead from my end. It looks like you're unmuted. Maybe we'll move on and I'll come back to Adam in a minute. Our next speaker is Constable Jason Jelani.
Hello, Constable. Constable Jelani, are you unmuted and able to speak?
Just wondering if there's a technical issue that I can address through my staff colleagues. Just give me 1 minute, please.
Okay.
Try one more time with Adam. Adam, I'm cueing you to unmute. Please go ahead if you can hear us and if you're ready.
It's unfortunate that we seem to be having audio problems with our public callers. I might suggest a workaround if Adam and Constable Jelani can hear us. If you would like to send a note to somebody who can read your comment, or if you can type it in the Q&A, we could get it that way. Our apologies. As we continue to work with distant meetings, we continue to have technical difficulties that challenge us from time to time, unfortunately.
I'm going to keep trying from my end, Chair. It's Heather again, but let's try Julia from the Community YYC and see if we can't get her to queue up.
Okay, well, hello, Julia. Are you there?
Julia, it looks like you're unmuted from my end again, but I can't hear anything. Sorry, everyone. Chair, the only suggestion I can have is to take a 5-minute break and we can try to reach out to Zoom directly and see if we have something we can resolve here.
Well, that is a good suggestion. So it is currently 5:25. We will take a 5-minute break. We'll see you back here at 5:30. Thank you.
Why doesn't this work? Oh, they're gonna try and fix it. Testing. Oh, it worked.
Hi, who did we just have testing the line?
Oh, me, Julia.
Oh, great. Okay, Julia, thanks. Can I just get you to hold for a minute?
Yes, definitely.
See whether I can get Adam working at the same time, or at least queue him up to go before or after you. Thank you. Oh, there's Adam. It looks like you've just come online as well, have you? And Margaret?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
here.
Okay. We'll reconvene in about 2 minutes, but if I could just get Margaret and Julia to just hold tight for a few minutes. And Adam, from my end, if you can hear me, you look the same as Margaret and Julia on the screen in terms of being unmuted. So I'm not sure where the issue is with you. And we just have two others in line behind you folks. Maybe I will unmute them all and ask them to just wait their turn as well.
I'm here.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, yeah, yeah, there'll be an end tomorrow.
Oh, hello?
Hi, is that Taylor?
It is, yes.
Okay, we're just trying to queue everybody up. I'm just gonna, now that I've got you on the line, I'm just gonna ask you to hold tight.
Yeah.
Yvonne, if you are there, we'll ask you to do the same.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. We should have everyone back on the line in a minute, and what I'll do is call each of your names and ask that person to unmute. But I've got all of your lines open to participate when it's your turn. Thank you so much for your patience, everyone.
Thank you.
Chair, I think we're ready to go when you are. It's 5:30 now.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather, and welcome back, everybody. I believe I heard that we have our audio issues sorted out for our public participants. So once again, we'll turn to Heather to queue up those who've asked to speak.
Thank you. We've managed to sort out 4 of the 5 people in the queue. Adam, Messiah, I still haven't been able to connect with you. So if you want to reach out through email, that would be great. And I will turn it over to Julia with the Community YYC. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hello. So I would like to, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Julia. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. I would like to address to the chair what happened on August 12th at the Calgary courthouse. For those who do not know, multiple eyewitnesses, video evidence, and I'm sure CCTV footage showed Taylor McNally being attacked by an off-duty sheriff in front of about 7 or 8 other courthouse sheriffs. The attack came during the 14th day of a protest against police brutality and to ensure the firing of Alex Dunn, who is still on an unpaid leave, and this is not acceptable. When Taylor, fully within her rights, went to film the sheriffs who were laughing and mocking the protest, she was attacked by the off-duty sheriff, Elena Cunningham. Taylor defended herself, and for this, she was brutally and violently arrested, including having a large chunk of her hair ripped out while being put in a knee-neck restraint. When a fellow protester, Jack, came to her aid, they were also brutally attacked by the same off-duty sheriff, including throwing Taylor's phone at Jack. Jack now suffers from a concussion and needs minor reconstruction on their zygoma. It is beyond concerning to me to see so many sheriffs witness what happened and not even blink an eye towards their colleague, yet they happily used excessive force on Taylor and company. The confidence of the sheriffs as she attacked Taylor and Jack is the most concerning of all. Cunningham was constantly pacing in her power and obvious rage between Taylor and Jack as they were brutally taken down. Cunningham seemed sure that she would not be found at fault for her assault or instigation. How do these actions show a police force that keep the community safe? I want to know why the off-duty sheriff was not charged with assault when it was very, very clear that she struck first. Why is the attacker not being charged or publicly acknowledged? Why did the police not even bat an eye when they decided to violently arrest those who the colleague attacked in front of them? Police statements say Taylor and Jack are the aggressors, while the videos and eyewitnesses clearly show that this is otherwise. It is very concerning that a sheriff can attack someone and so confidently know that their colleagues will not hold them accountable, and indeed their colleagues will participate in the violent attack as well. This is police corruption, and me and many others demand a public inquiry to this unprovoked attack. Either conduct a full investigation into what happened and what took place against Taylor, Jack, and others between July 27th and August 12th outside the Calgary courthouse. Charge Elena Cunningham with assault with a weapon, assault causing bodily harm, mischief, and theft. Also, re-edit and re-release a new statement on CPS social media stating that assaults were made against Taylor and Jack by the courthouse sheriffs. Also, we expect all charges against Taylor and Jack to be dropped. As we know from the documentaries like Above the Law, Calgary police get away with and coordinate a lot of violence. They support each other. Although a normalized practice in your police force is a gang mentality. When we demand efficacy from our police, but we see corruption and it being brushed under the rug, we must question heavily the leadership normalizing and dismissing this corruption. Cunningham's confidence in her deplorable behavior is the reason we must talk about this. This is the confidence of the complete system of enforcement, sheriffs, police, and RCMP. Calgary sheriffs use coordinated police brutality in an attempt to silence those speaking out against police brutality. As Angela was saying in her citizen survey results presentation, racialized people want to be treated safely, fairly, and like human beings. Your presentation showed there is an awareness around racialized violence and fear of police. You are aware there is systemic racism and racism in your policing system and your employees. Yet the reality of Calgary policing and sheriffs was shown at the courthouse that day. I know you can't answer my questions, but I do hope you consider what I'm saying and look into it. There are videos, there are witnesses. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us and for your comments, Julia. And as I indicated in my introductory remarks, there certainly are, we have a public complaints director for police complaints at the commission, and we have within CPS, PSS section for professional standards. I am not familiar with what the sheriff's organization has in that regard. And I would like to note, though, that they are separate organizations. Heather, who do we have next in the queue?
The next speaker is Margaret McQuiston. Go ahead, Margaret.
Hello, Margaret. Margaret,
hello. Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Croft. My name is Margaret McQuiston. I am a member of the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good's Truth and Reconciliation Research Action Team. For those who don't know, the Calgary Alliance for the Common Good is a nonpartisan, nonprofit alliance of congregations, unions, schools, and community groups representing more than 37,000 Calgarians. So thank you for this opportunity to address the Commission again today on behalf of the Calgary Alliance. Our last presentation to you was at your June meeting. We hope that you had some kind of a break despite all of your ongoing work. As we have explained to the Commission in the past, we are trying to improve the relationship which the Calgary Police Service has with Indigenous people in the city by advocating for the hiring of an Indigenous liaison officer in each of its 8 districts. I was listening with interest to the anti-racism report, which was presented earlier, and we are very pleased to hear that a 3rd position will be added to the Indigenous liaison team. We thank the police service for listening to us and for taking this first step. I would also like to say that I found the Illumina presentation incredibly informative. Although I'm not surprised at any of the findings, it was still very interesting information. There was lots of information in that report, which certainly supports the work that we are advocating. And I particularly resonated with some of the comments made by Gabrielle Lindstrom. So in my statement today, I would like to follow up with you on what has occurred since my last statement to you on June 29th and provide some recommendations to the Commission for consideration. On June 30th, members of our Truth and Reconciliation Action Team had a productive meeting with Deputy Chief Katie McClellan, Police Superintendent Asif Rashid, and Constable Justin Thompson. At that meeting, the CPS agreed to help facilitate ways for our Indigenous organizer, Suzanne Cario-Zeus, to potentially join the Indigenous Advisory Council, and for our elder, Doreen Healy, to potentially join the Elders Advisory Council, which is currently being created. Since then, Suzanne has been asked to attend a meeting of the Indigenous Advisory Council, and it will be up to the council to decide if she will become an official member. And Elder Doreen has received an invitation to the Elders Council. We are encouraged that the CPS also committed to meeting with us regularly. It is through continued dialogue that we can make meaningful progress towards a better Calgary. We do not have another meeting officially in the calendar. However, we have recently heard from Superintendent Rashid and Deputy Chief McClellan, and it is expected that a meeting will be set for early October. Previously, we had heard that the CPS had been advised by the Indigenous Advisory Council that due to the racism and discrimination within the CPS, additional Indigenous liaison officers should not be hired. They said this because they felt that the CPS was not far enough along its reconciliation path, and it is not a safe or supportive workplace for such officers to be effective. At our next meeting with the CPS, we are hoping to get further details on what the CPS is doing to address the advice of the Indigenous Advisory Council and to move more quickly in building and implementing their Indigenous roadmap. We believe that the anti-racism work must continue in parallel with adding to the number of Indigenous liaison officers. We say this because more Indigenous liaison officers are needed on the ground sooner than later to build the relationships that are needed to lessen the fear which exists within the Indigenous community when interacting with the CPS. This cannot wait until the anti-racism strategy is completed. Based on the anti-racism presentation we heard earlier, there's lots of good work being done to address racism, but we all know that this is in the early stages and it is a long-term endeavor. This problem needs to be addressed urgently by using all avenues that are available. Also, to get around the racism and discrimination issue, we have heard that the CPS is considering training non-Indigenous officers to fill the functions of Indigenous liaison officer. This begs the question to me, was this new position that was announced earlier this afternoon filled by an Indigenous person? We know that non-Indigenous officers do not have the lived experience necessary to connect effectively with Indigenous people who interact with the police. There is no way to teach lived experience. Indigenous people have the right to interact with those that look like them and who understand the full impact of systemic racism, the legacy of the Indian residential schools, and the importance of their wisdom and healing traditions. This is consistent with the Illumina research we just heard about, which talked about the need for more diversity. Although we are encouraged that the CPS is willing to meet with us on a regular basis and that we will have the opportunity to raise our concerns directly with them, we believe that the Commission also has a role to play in advancing the hiring of Indigenous liaison officers. According to your mandate, the Police Commission is responsible for the budget of the CPS. Therefore, we recommend that the Commission ensure resources are available to address the racism and discrimination within CPS on an expedited basis and provide the budget to hire Indigenous liaison officers for each of the 8 districts. You are also responsible to ensure sufficient persons are employed by the service to carry out the functions of the service. We would argue that the CPS does not have sufficient persons to build the relationships that are needed between the CPS and the Indigenous community. We believe that the hiring of Indigenous liaison officers in each district will go a long way in supporting the anti-racism, equity, diversity, and inclusion work necessary for the anti-racism strategy to be meaningful. We would like to keep you informed of the outcome of our meetings with the CPS and hope that you will allow us to do so through this monthly public forum. I thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for joining us once again and for your comments and for your continued engagement in these issues. We appreciate your participation and your contributions. Heather, I believe we have a couple more public participants.
We do. The next one is Taylor McNally. Go ahead, Taylor.
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Taylor.
Hey, holy, I have so much to say after this meeting. I'm just going to stick with what I wrote. Um, Seeing as, you know, you keep saying, send us emails, do all of these things. Y'all ignore our emails, y'all ignore our phone calls. We try to set up private meetings, those are still being ignored. So, and even though this topic was already brought up, I'm going to keep bringing it up until something is done. So I'm sure you don't need me to introduce who I am, as many members of the CPS all monitor my accounts and movements quite regularly. But for those who do not know me, I've been a resident of Calgary for 16 years. I'm a Black woman, an entrepreneur, a mother, and a very active member in many communities in the city. I'm the co-founder of Inclusive Canada, member of Defund to Fund, and throughout this last year and a half have become criminalized within your institution simply for standing up for basic human rights. My name is Taylor McNally, and on August 12th, after 14 days of protesting against police brutality outside of the Calgary Court Center, I was met with more police brutality when a member of the Alberta law enforcement chose to react after she was being filmed. Despite this officer's use of violence, she walked away free while myself and a friend were brutally thrown to the ground, arrested, held for 8 hours, and walked away with a combined total of 10 charges. There's a few things that need to be pointed out here. Number one, this officer, who is a courthouse sheriff, is also an ex-CPS officer who was removed from the force for violent misconduct in the past, but was seemingly given a second chance by becoming a sheriff. Number two, this officer was the first to lay hands on anyone while other sheriffs stood by and watched. In fact, in one of the videos that is circulating online, of the sheriff giving an uppercut to my friend Jack, then throwing something at them. It's actually my cell phone that the sheriff had ripped from my hands at the beginning of this altercation that she is shown throwing at Jack's head. And as what was mentioned earlier, Jack was left with a concussion from the violence used against them that day and requires minor reconstructive facial surgery. Number three, all video footage from spectators in the Calgary Court Center showed the disgusting use of force and misconduct that took place that day. So I'm just wondering how y'all are still investigating us and have yet to lay charges against a sheriff, let alone others who assaulted us during that 14-day span of protesting, because there were many, including another off-duty sheriff who assaulted us. Number four, choosing to lay 7 charges on me that go back the 2 weeks we were outside looks pretty set up to me. If I was that dangerous to the public, you'd think one of the many officers who walked past me every day for 2 weeks would have arrested me and put a stop to my actions, no? I was literally on your doorstep Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you didn't feel the need to pull any of those charges out then. You realize how bad that makes you look, yes? Number 5, I know how much you hate holding yourselves accountable, but the public deserves an updated media statement from your social media channels to include all details of what took place that day. Number 6, last but not least, to get to the base of this matter, the public deserves answers on what is happening with Alex Dunn. We are still demanding him to be fired. And if you think we will stop there, we will not. We demand that he see disciplinary actions through. None of this retiring or resigning so he avoids responsibility. You keep going on about building a relationship with the community, and every day you prove to us how performative that statement is through your actions against racialized and marginalized members of this community. I'm seeing houseless community members being arrested and charged with theft for stealing food. I'm watching Black youth being pushed to the streets and into the hands of police at 9 p.m. from the East Village basketball court when the noise bylaw doesn't start until 11. I'm seeing white people march the street with signs that say, "We are True Bloods." What kind of city do you think you're building here? You've already lost 3 people from your anti-racism committee, and there's more of them ready to walk. There really isn't enough time to go into everything that counters the performative stats you just spent 2 to 3 hours providing here, or full details into every single thing that has happened to us during those 15 days protesting outside the courthouse, from food being thrown at us, signs being torn down or ripped from our hands, people calling us niggers, or full-on physical assaults made by the public. You are really lucky that Black and Indigenous people only want equity and justice instead of revenge. I've told you, Mark, in both public and private meetings that there is a much better way we can move forward together. But unsurprisingly, there seems to be zero interest in actually doing better and instead upholding this frat boy institution that serves no one but yourselves. There is zero trust between the Calgary Police Service and the community. Hell, even the people who were screaming "Back the Blue" last year don't even stand you anymore. So I think it's really time how you rethink how you do business. And while you're at it, you can get rid of Kevin Starblanket too. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us once again, Taylor, and for providing us with your comments. Heather, can you cue the next person in our line?
Yes, the final speaker is Yvonne from the Bear Clan.
Hello, Yvonne. Welcome.
Okay, ni tani ko box kana skin nakiyaki. I'm from the Siksika Nation. I am here and I'm super honored to be able to hear people like Taylor McNally speak. I'm here representing the Bear Clan Patrol. And the Bear Clan Patrol was founded in 2019 here in Mohkinstsis. We have been to day patrolling since November 22nd, 2019. We have the honor of serving the communities of Forest Lawn, Marlborough, East Calgary. We serve proudly downtown Calgary, the core. We serve Mission, we serve the Beltline. It's really, really, really hard to take seriously that out of a city of like millions of people, that there were only 15 Black people and 15 Indigenous people selected for a survey, when the Calgary City Police has an estimated budget of, I'm gonna ballpark this, well over $1 billion, I would say, even millions of dollars. So that being said, when there's campaigns like defund to fund, if you're wanting to combat racism, you should be putting that money back into community consultations at a larger venue. As a member and a founding co-founder of the Bear Clan Patrol, when we're out in the community, I find it really, really hard because the statistics that are being laid down are not met with what we're seeing on the streets. We heard today from the missing persons unit, Bear Clan Patrol right now, out of 10 cases that get presented to us by the family members of people that are missing, we are able to recover 9 of them safely, connect them back to families, connect them to supports, connect them to housing, connect them to supports within the community, and provide aftercare. That one person that we're not able to connect with the family is out of personal choice of that person. We applied for funding through the Calgary Police over 3 years, and we had a budget of $750,000. We were told it was too much. There's been calls to action through the White Goose Flying Report for policing. There's been calls by the TRC to reform policing. The Bear Clan Patrol is a grassroots initiative. We don't get chief and counseled by anybody. We don't have charitable status. We haven't applied for it yet, but in the 2 years that we've been operating, we have helped out the Calgary Police numerous times. I do believe that people like Cindy Provost and officers like Alan Chamberlain and Justin Thompson, they cannot do this alone. And we only talk to Alan Chamberlain for a specific reason, because Alan Chamberlain actually hears us, actually cares about us. Alan Chamberlain is actually out with us in the community. If there's anybody that you can take any community leads and initiatives from, it's those 3, especially Alan and especially Cindy Provost. Out of all of the Indigenous officers that you may have employed with you, you can do better, because the Bear Clan is trying to show you how you do better every single Friday, every single time we find children, every single time that we are responding to domestic calls, every single time that we're answering calls from the community and the police come as a second call. We are showing you and reminding you how Indigenous consultation and Indigenous decolonization of policing works. You've been asking these questions now for a couple of years of anti-racism, anti-combating all this stuff that's happening. And again, Taylor made the really good point, is how are people like Alex Dunn still on the payroll of the Calgary City Police? How are people like Kevin Starblanket able to openly target a Black woman for having a point of view and an opinion? How is that constructive? How is that helping positive community outputs? As you guys want to focus on the good in the community and you want to focus on the good frameworks and the good relations, how is it that you keep such toxic people like those individuals employed with the Calgary City Police? With the Bear Clan Patrol, I encourage all of you officers, all of your commission people to get out of the office and patrol with us one Friday. I encourage you to actually walk the talk and to come out with us. We're just Indigenous people that took back the streets. We have gone out every single week directly through COVID. We're not publicly funded and we're still out here. And yet we've told you now 5 times how to get things done. And you're still asking us how to combat anti-racism. Obviously, the calls are not being heard and nothing is being changed, because if it was, we wouldn't be having these meetings. And next time you want to do community consultation, I would encourage you to call the Bear Clan Patrol, because we can ask the community, because the Calgary City Police is currently bankrupt. You have no currency with Indigenous or Black people. And that is a serious problem that you need to start looking at yourself in the mirror and start actually saying, how can I do better? Not just performatively, not just in a Zoom call, but in everyday actions in and outside of the office. And the Bear Clan Patrol, we stand proudly by all of the communities that we serve. We stand proudly by all of the homeless and houseless people that we serve. And I really encourage you, literally humble yourself and come out with us someday. Yen.
Thank you, Yvonne, for joining us and for your comments. Heather, I understand that you are making one last effort to see if Adam Messiah is able to join us by voice.
Can you hear me?
There, we've got you, Adam. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Okay.
Oh,
Welcome,
wonderful.
Adam. Thanks for your
I'm heard now?
perseverance.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, and you as well. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for putting together this presentation and sticking through to the end. Some of it was quite insightful. My question is for the Calgary Police Commission. I was wondering whether or not you guys have gotten the opportunity to be presented the third-party analysis on the Student Resource Officer program that was shown to the external ARAC committee, as well as the internal ARAC committee thus far. Am I allowed to ask you a question, or is there able to be a response to that? Because it's kind of the same thing that was kind of spoken on in the last individual that spoke, was the issue of engagement. So as far as through my work, I know that engaging with the public at a decent level is the most important part of standing up and implementing any effective and efficient strategy. If we're going to look at the Student Resource Officer program, from what I was shown, is that they engaged with students, officers, faculty, staff, and parents. And when I was asked, or I asked the question about, you know, how many of these stakeholders were engaged and what sort of resources were used to utilize this engagement, I found that there was a large amount of barriers to entries to minority individuals, and primarily students, which is the entire reason we're having the conversation about the Student Resource Officer program. When I asked how many students had been engaged through the web portals or the online surveys or the emails, I was told that 50 students had been engaged, and there's been no information regarding the racial demographics of those 50 students that were engaged to inform the third-party analysis, as well as what is going to be used to contribute to moving forward with this Student Resource Officer program. Now, 50 students out of 118,000 students in Calgary is literally 0.042% of the student body. And if you don't have the racial makeup of those 50 students, then how are you really getting the appropriate information from the communities to determine whether or not the Student Resource Officer program is moving in the right direction? It's all about proper engagement. And when it was presented to us, I think that was the biggest concern that I had, was how can you confidently decide to move forward with the strategy and possibly suggest that there needs to be further engagement when in fact you only engaged with less than 1% of the student body, and we're having a conversation about anti-racism. And this is primarily brought forth to us by racialized students that might feel like they feel fear, violence, anxiety, unfair treatment by an officer that's inside their school. You know, there's obviously a lot of issues surrounding that. The pipeline from schools to jails, expulsions are generally higher throughout minority communities. But also the other question was, I don't even know if you guys have seen this presentation. That was the initial question that I had for you, is whether or not you've been presented it. So then you might have an idea of what it is that I'm referring to. But I think there needs to be some sort of avenues provided for students who may feel as if they are feeling these things, to be able to go and have some sort of complaint process inside the school administration or through the Student Resource Officer program themselves, aside from the original police complaints process, which is something that is also currently being worked on. Is anybody allowed to comment while I'm speaking, or is this just kind of like a present and then wait till the end? Because I'm trying to see if we're having a conversation here.
Well, as I indicated, Adam, we thank you for participating and for your comments. And at the introduction of the meeting, as I indicated, we have public participation only for the receipt of comments, and we do appreciate those comments and appreciate your input on the methodology on the SRO report. We are not and do not engage in Q&A in the public portion, but we do take your comments and we do listen to them. So we appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with us.
Okay, well, in that case, I guess if you've seen it, then you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen it yet, then you're going to understand what I'm talking about. But just know that only 1% or less than 1% of the student body was actually engaged to inform that entire strategy. And my suggestion is that you need to do continuous consultation. And kind of similar to what the Bear Clan was saying, there is lots of ways to engage with individuals, more than 50 people, before you should inform a strategy that's going to impact over 100,000 students with the commitment to anti-racism that was made by the Calgary Police Force last year. And I think those are my primary comments for now. Thanks.
Thanks very much once again for joining us and for your comments. With that, I believe, Heather, that was our last public participant. So I believe we are now at the end of the public portion of our meeting. So we thank everybody for joining us today, and we thank all of our presenters again for the excellent presentations and all of our participants for the excellent conversation. It's been a really important conversation today, particularly with our Illumina partners, and look forward to our further work on that. So we will give the rest of our commissioners a break right now in the CPS. We will come back after the media session. So it is currently 6 o'clock. We will come back on at 6:15. Thanks, everybody.
I'm ready to queue up the media when the chief and the chair are ready.
I am ready. Are you ready in the room there, Chief?
Good to go.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. I have just asked to unmute Adam Toy. Go ahead, Adam.
Hello, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Fascinating conversation as always. First question to go to either Chief Neufeld or Ms. Croft. I'm just wondering about I know that the Illumina presentation and document is very fresh. And I know that, we all watched the presentation, but I'm just wondering if there's been comments about the applicability of it in terms of it being more qualitative than quantitative, and doesn't necessarily speak for a whole race of peoples. But I'm wondering about what, on first blush, you see this document, this study as in terms of providing direction for policing and oversight going forward with this anti-racism direction that CPS has taken.
Well, thanks, Adam. I will start, but I will certainly give the chief an opportunity to respond as well. You're quite right that this is very fresh and we are still absorbing the information, and we want to be sure that we understand what we've heard fully. But the purpose of this report, as we described the purpose of the methodology that was used was to understand those portions of Calgarians who don't have the best experiences or the best perceptions, rather than taking a survey and saying, we got great marks, we got 92% approval. We decided this time to delve only into those who don't have a good perception of policing. And that gave us very rich information that can help us inform the work that we're already doing, as you're well aware, on anti-racism and in guiding and overseeing how the CPS is incorporating these kinds of perspectives into the work that they are doing. There is so much in the report that we need to look at that we think will be very helpful in looking at solutions. But before we even get to solution, we have to make sure we truly understand what the problem is, that what is it we're trying to solve. And we heard very clearly today that the problem we are trying to solve is the continuing perceptions of people that they don't or can't always trust policing services when they need them or experience or have interactions with them. I will give the chief an opportunity to respond, but I also see that Gabrielle has her hand up. And although your question was directed to me and to the chief, Adam, if Gabrielle has some comments that she would like to provide, I suspect you'd like to hear those as well.
Yes, certainly open to them.
Thank you. I just want to say something about the problem. The problem is not with the perceptions of the people. The problem is racism in the CPS. I want to state that. That's the problem. How we are conceptualizing and defining problems is indeed the problem. So the problem is racism within the CPS. The problem is not the perceptions of people who've experienced racism. So I just want to say that.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. And as we talked about earlier, the learning experience of those of us who are engaged in this is so important, and learning from people such as you is critical. I will turn now to the chief for his comments on Adam's question.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Gabrielle, for the comments there. I think, Adam, as I said earlier, I think this is important work. I think it certainly reflects, strongly the voices of the people who were involved. And I think we are getting to the lived experiences of people who are oftentimes not heard, and we wouldn't maybe otherwise have heard. I think the key is that the insights are not so dissimilar, as I said, to some of the things that we heard last year and that we've heard since. I think, again, this just underscores that the work we have been doing that you heard about earlier in the presentation is important work, and I think it's focused in the right places. And so I think, the job now is to take this away and say what's new in here, what are we not covering right now, and figure out how we go forward so that we can make sure that the voices and the time that people gave to participate was well placed. So on that basis, we'll take it away and we'll do that. And the commission has their role, as the chair says. And I'm thankful for the folks who did take the time to participate. We appreciate the feedback. And as I say, we remain committed to doing this important work.
If I might press you a bit on that, Chief, do you then, and does your senior management just take these as more data points, or how does this, the nature of this study, does that weigh into the anti-racism work that the service is doing?
Well, I think we're going to take it very seriously, Adam. We don't, it's not because of the nature of the survey or nature of the work and the limitations. We're not saying that it's not important. It's very important. I think there's a number of different messages and pieces in there, and we'll have to look at each one and say, how do those inform the work that we're doing and what do they add? I saw a lot of pieces in there too around strong perceptions. I think in the Northeast, there's, as one example, folks have seen in the Northeast, additional police vehicles and this type of thing. Now we know that the West Winds campus is here in the Northeast, and we also have several other police facilities that service the whole city, but they're in the Northeast. So I can see where, there would be a strong perception that maybe there's more police, but I think, perceptions are reality. And so some of the messages that we see in the survey, those are definitely people's reality. Whether or not that's actually the case or whether those officers are just deploying from areas in the Northeast, remains to be seen. But I think during our engagements and when we're having discussions with folks, these are pieces that probably help to inform that conversation so that people understand some of the ways we're deployed and why they might see some of those things. But there's like I say, there's so much in the report. We do have to take it away and figure out what comes next. So that's work we'll do moving forward.
Okay. If I might ask you, just my final question, a question of news of the day. Earlier today, the Justice Minister added hospitals to the list of critical infrastructure that is now protected by Bill 1. I'm wondering if we can speak to what kind of an added load that may be to your officers in terms of having to police protests that are outside of hospitals.
Well, we've had quite a load with that just in terms of the sheer volume of protests we've seen. One thing I will say about this is I'm very pleased with many of the organizers of protests seem to have taken a second, thought about the necessity to protest in those particular locations because of the sensitivity. We did see the one here in Calgary. We've not seen another. I know that the group that had organized the one initially in Calgary had said they weren't going to continue to do that, and that's very much appreciated. I think the announcement by the province today was, adds one more tool in terms of the toolbox for police dealing with these types of situations moving forward. And so it'll be a useful tool like the other ones that currently exist. And again, on a case-by-case basis, we will use them as we need to. But my most sincere hope would be that we don't have to in those locations.
That's all my questions. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Adam. Heather, who do we have next?
Next, we have Madeline Smith.
Hello, Madeline. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just wanted to ask about the report on SROs in schools. If I'm correct, it sounds like that report is completed and that CPS leadership and police commission have now received it. Do you have a timeline for when that might be publicly released, or is that something that's going to happen?
I can answer that. Hi, Madeline. Yeah, so that report, I think is scheduled to go before the public meeting of the CPC in November. Heather, does that sound right?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, what date did you say you cut out?
It's the November meeting.
November. Okay. Thank you. That was my only question. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Before we turn to the next caller, I saw a hand up. I wasn't sure quite why that would be. Our next media caller, Heather.
We have one more media participant, and that's Dave Gilson.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for taking the time. I just have a few questions here. First of all, I do want to speak to Illumina's report, but first of all, I was just hoping to ask the chief here, if I could, just on the vaccination mandate. I just wanted to know what concerns you have been hearing from CPS employees about introducing a vaccination mandate for CPS and your response to it at this point.
Yeah, great question, Dave. Thank you. Yeah, I suppose that it's probably the very same as it is in the public. I think all of us know folks that are very much pro, and we know folks that are against vaccination mandates. So we have heard those views on both sides in our organization. I can say that I've received information myself from employees on both sides of the argument, and certainly well thought out on both sides and well articulated. And so, we're mindful of that. So we're taking all of that into account, certainly, as we make a final decision in terms of how we might move forward. And yeah, I guess it's just no surprise that we're seeing the same sort of polarization inside the organization and any organization as we do in the community.
By the way, if I may, just a quick follow-up to that, it's just so I understand the dynamic of this then. So you're waiting to coordinate your response to this with the city. Can you maybe just expand a little bit on that? So what does that ultimately mean then? Is it that you take your lead from the city in terms of the policy that you're going to put in place, or just so that it's a coordinated announcement?
Yeah, great question. I'm not sure if it's so important to coordinate the announcement, although we may do that. I think it's more in the process. So as you can imagine, we're actually working along, we're working with our employees, they're working with their employees, but obviously some of the unions cross over because again, the city is the signatory on the collective agreements. So again, the process of engaging those unions and associations is sort of going in lockstep. There's some different ones involved and that sort of thing. So one other thing I think that we're doing is there's some logistical work, I guess, in some of the considerations about some of the policy options. And so we want to make sure that we're solid from a labor relations and from just a logistical standpoint in knowing what the implications of some of the policy choices are. So like I say, the announcement will come quite soon. I think it will be coordinated with the city, but really it's not about coming out together with it. It's more just about making sure that we're engaging meaningfully with the folks that this really matters to, because it's an important topic.
Okay, thank you. And just switching to the Illumina report. Now, my colleague has already asked in terms of some reaction, obviously from the commission and from the chief. But maybe if I can ask those involved with the Illumina report. Obviously, this is complex, undoubtedly. I'm wondering, did you get a sense among the participants what kind of hope that they have for some sense of what they would identify as meaningful change to these issues that they've raised? And I guess I leave that as an open question for one of you, that if you'd care to respond to that.
I will start with responding. I can speak to the Black participants, and I can let Gabrielle speak to the Indigenous. For the Black participants, there certainly was hope for them. They had optimism that the CPS could make change. They were balancing it though with realism, knowing that this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. They didn't come out and tell us what are all the changes that they thought could or should happen. Education came up. They wanted to see when we were in our Black citizen groups, we talked about different actions that the CPS currently is taking with their anti-racism plan to get feedback. And they provided their thoughts on each of those and what was important. And depending on the particular initiative that we talked about, they had a variety of different thoughts on how those initiatives could be tackled, from bringing in third parties to address, say, data collection, right? Race-based data collection and street checks to make sure there's more accountability and credibility. So there was different feedback on those different actions, and those are all in the report what their feedback was. But Black citizens were hopeful. Like the people that we were talking to, this was particular participants, most of them were very hopeful that the CPS could make changes, but they also balanced it with knowing it was going to take time.
I can jump in there as well with regards to the Indigenous focus groups. So in respect to hope, hope is something that Indigenous people have always had and continue to have, and hope is something that was in the focus groups as well. So there was some direct sort of ways to address racism that I kind of touched on earlier in my presentation. That's the need for an overhaul, anyways, a new way of looking at our new way of doing Indigenous awareness that isn't just focused on Indigenous people, thinking that learning more about Indigenous people is going to minimize racism. It needs to be focused on deep inward reflection that is typically found in anti-racism training. So reflection on positionality, reflection on one's own privilege is important. The need for accountability. So this was where in having an Indigenous liaison in there who is actually Indigenous, not just the position, but actually somebody who knows the community, who understands the experiences of Indigenous people and can liaise that way. Because they are Indigenous, learning from positive interactions with the CPS. And I mentioned in my presentation that there wasn't much positive feedback from the participants in the Indigenous focus groups. And I don't think it's helpful in this context to be focusing on sort of what is so positive here when the overwhelming evidence is very negative, is points to the fact that the problem is racism. So it's not helpful just to hang on to these flowery rose-colored glasses and say we're doing a great job. Too bad that these are happening. But so I wanted to say that, and also to the role of the CPS in the focus groups. It came out that this is like a military organization, and even my own dealings, the own research I've had with the CPS, they're very invested in those hierarchies. Call me sergeant, call me colonel, or whatever those labels they call themselves. So there's a lot of investment in those hierarchies. And so the role needs to be around safety and around accountability. The notion of decolonization wasn't specifically named, but it was certainly brought up by one participant, and some other of the participants' responses encapsulated decolonizing processes. So CPS is part of the system, a part of other systems, and works in tandem with other institution and societal systems. And so there needs to be a decolonizing approach within CPS. Knowledge related to Indian residential schools must be framed in the context of a cultural genocide that is consistent with a colonial logic of containment, not residential schools and intergenerational trauma as something that creates less evolved citizens. I'm still wrapping my head around how that has been understood. When it's not really. Intergenerational trauma isn't something that is a problem for Indigenous people, really. It's the roots of intergenerational trauma emerge from the colonial context and colonial violence, and we need to start seeing it in that way. And there's also there was this tendency to take up training like unconscious or implicit bias training as a solution to address the problem of racism and as an approach in anti-racism training. Unconscious bias theory tends to naturalize racism as a neurobiological outcome of human development in response to difference, and that through personal awareness of this natural response, we can start to shift our thinking. However, how we frame racism matters, and the theory of unconscious bias as being premised in personal awareness allows people to reduce their moral responsibility in the outcomes of racial discrimination as an unconscious and unavoidable feature of the human brain. Racial discrimination is then normalized, and people's social and moral responsibilities are diminished. And this is not helpful, and it does not address the existence of racism as a system of power that shapes our legal system. So these are just some areas for consideration that I'm truly hoping, as an Indigenous person engaged in this research, that the CPS is going to take up really, in a serious way.
Thank you very much.
Heather, do we have any other media participants, or is that all of our callers?
I don't see anyone else with their hand up, and I don't have anyone else waiting on the list who has shown up in the meeting today.
Okay, well, for those of us who are still listening in, we really appreciate your participation and all of the questions and discussion today. And we look forward to having you at our next month's meeting in late October. Have a good evening, everybody. And thank you once again to all of our Illumina participants, and particularly Gabrielle, for all of your energetic and hugely helpful and insightful comments and answers to questions tonight. It was invaluable. Have a good evening, everybody.